Good morning, Surrey Police Contact Centre. How can I help you?
A strange thing happened to me this morning. I went for a walk and got attacked.
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. Like, something serious has happened now, like what?
No issues with anything, with anybody or anything that could be related, no?
No, last year I had an issue with my partner, but that all sorted and we're friends again.
A very significant head injury that had been suffered. It had been caused by someone, and this became a murder investigation.
This murder was one of the most brutal that I have seen within 20 years.
You never think it's going to happen on your own doorstep. There's some evil people about.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do.
On the eastern side of the River Blackwater in Surrey lies the small village of Ash.
It sort of sits in between Aldershot in Hampshire and Guildford. Ash is fairly typical of a lot of places in Surrey in that you will find lots of different communities within a community. From a policing perspective, not a lot happens.
They're a very close-knit community around here. Everyone knows everyone.
At the heart of the community lives 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
She was really a lovable and special person. She did have a big circle of friends because she used to work in Potter's music shop, and then she left there due to illness.
She'd always say hello or wave at the window if she was in the house. She was very much always quite happy and never seemed to say a bad word about anyone.
Auntie Joy was a little naughty auntie, if I can say. She's a little naughty auntie in the way of the... she was one of those that turned up unannounced, which was quite funny. And she'd turn up, I'm not staying long, and her not staying long would always turn into at least a couple of hours.
In 2021, Joy started dating local man Trevor Dibner. They had known each other for 18 years.
Trevor Dibner is somebody, again, who has spent his life working. Trevor had a number of businesses and was known locally as a taxi driver. He's also a mechanic and latterly had started working for Ford, where he was doing MOTs. He was somebody who had an interest in motorsport, and he collected model buses, which you know was a passion of his.
I knew him in my teenage years when he would be driving the minibuses, and we would hire minibuses from him to do runs to girls' nights out, if I was out with the girls, or if we were going to the Ascot races with our partners, he'd take us there.
They used to go and see a stock car, go and watch stock car. They also used to go to these old bus fairs and everything. And I think it was just a little bit of an attraction.
In October 2022, the couple moved in together and their relationship flourished.
Trevor and Joy became engaged at Sandown Racecourse on the 4th of December, and Trevor announced it, as we do these days, on Facebook to tell friends, contacts that he and Joy had become engaged. Joy was at a time in her life where things were starting to go right. She had things to look forward to, and things were going well for her.
But life for the happy couple is about to change.
I received a call very late on the 11th of May from the on-call crime scene manager who was in attendance at Churchview in Ash. He'd responded to reports of a suspicious death.
On the 11th of May, Trevor had gone to work and spent the day at work. He'd been unable to get hold of Joy throughout the day, and then he came back to his home address and found Joy was lying on the floor, not moving. He called the ambulance service to report this. At first, it wasn't clear to the officers who were there whether or not this was a case where somebody else had been involved. There was the potential. Joy was quite vulnerable and unstable on her feet. She could have fallen.
Within the small community, news begins to spread of a police presence at Joy's house.
I heard from my eldest grandson. I said, what's the matter? Come on. He said, it's Joy. I said, oh no, she's not in hospital again, is she? Just like that. And he said, no, it's worse than that, Nan. I said, what do you mean it's worse than that?
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. They're pulling the sofas outside the house. There's carpet outside the house. Like, they're bringing everything out. They're all in hazmat suits, everything. And I was like, shit, like, something serious has happened now. Like, what?
Phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law. And she said, have you heard? I went, oh, what's happened? She said, about your auntie. I went, auntie who? Your Auntie Joy. I went, what do you mean? And she said, she's been beaten up. And I put the phone down, and my hands were so clammy. I looked at my partner, I was sat beside him, and I went, you need to take me to Auntie Joyce, please, now.
And it was raining, it was cold. Got up there, police cars were there. It was cornered off from round the corner, tape, and the police were standing outside. We parked up, and I went across to the policeman, and I said, and he said, who are you? I said, I'm Joy's eldest sister. I said, can you please tell me what's happened to her? He said, I can't at the moment. I said, please tell me, is she alive or is she dead? I said, tell me. I've got to know. So he said, well, I'm ever so sorry. I said, don't say anymore.
It was quite quickly then all over social media. Something's happened in Churchview, the police are all there. Doesn't really happen, especially in a quiet community like this.
The policeman stood there, guarding the door, another policeman inside. Everybody gathered around, lined my auntie's pathway. And I said to the officer, excuse me, can you tell me, please, what's going on? And as he was talking, as the officer was talking to us, I happened to look down a bit to my auntie's doormat. I saw my auntie's foot, just a big pool of blood. About in a police size. But her foot was buckled back, like as if she'd been crawling, trying to get into the front room. Fighting for her life.
Surrey detectives are at the scene of a suspected assault, which has left local woman Joy Bolton dead. Her fiancé, Trevor Dibnah, has called emergency services after returning home from work to find her motionless on the floor.
The injuries that Joy sustained were amongst the worst head injuries that I've ever observed, it was very clear that there was no other mechanism than a repeated assault that could have caused them. That repeated assault had been committed by somebody.
As the police begin their investigation, Joy's family remain outside her home, waiting for information. Joy's fiancé is still on the scene. He's the only one who can tell them anything.
I was sitting in the back of my eldest grandson's car, and Joy's partner come over. I said, "Tell me what's happened." And he said, "Well, I come home about 20 to 6 tonight and had to push my way through the front door, and there she was laying there." He said, "But I tried ringing her between 10 and 10:30 like I normally do, and he couldn't get an answer." I said, "Well, why didn't you go home and check on her?"
While detectives launch a murder inquiry, their colleagues are looking into reports of another attack on a female, just a few streets from Joy's house.
Yeah, I went for a walk this morning and this woman come up to me, asked me if I was Sarah. I said yes. The next thing, she's pulling my hair out, grabbed my carrier bag, which had my raincoat in it, and grabbed my glasses off me. I don't know if she threw them away because I couldn't find them.
Okay.
And ran off.
Okay, so she literally just said, are you Sarah?
The woman is alleged to have pulled her hair and scratched her, as well as taking a carrier bag that she had with her, which she said had her coat and glasses in.
She said, no, she grabbed my hair and said that'll come in handy, because she took a chunk of hair.
You don't know the lady at all?
Not a clue, not a clue.
But she knew your name?
Yeah, she said stay away as well.
She stated that she had been approached by a woman who was unknown to her, described her as late 40s, early 50s, dark glasses, long black coat, hood up, carrying a plastic bag.
It just seems strange that she said that will come in handy, my chunk of hair.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter said. She said, I don't like that. Mum, what's she going to use your hair for?
The woman had walked away from her assault, suffering only minor injuries. Officers take the details of the woman and are surprised to discover she is Sarah Mackenzie, Trevor Dibner's ex.
Sarah Mackenzie also lived in Ash. She'd previously been in a relationship with Trevor, and they'd lived together for a number of years until Trevor made the decision that he would leave Sarah to be with Joy.
Police now need to look into the fact Trevor's fiancée and his former partner have been attacked on the same day.
It's unusual and it's a coincidence given what had happened to Joy. So forensic strategies and search strategies were put in place to investigate the robbery of Sarah Mackenzie just as much as the homicide of Joy Bolton.
Sarah phoned Trevor straight away and told him that she was attacked. Sarah described the person as 40-odd-year-old, jogging towards her, ripped her glasses off her face.
Trevor agreed to go round to Sarah's house on his way home, which was something that he would often do and had continued to do even after leaving Sarah for Joy. Trevor said that he spent a few minutes there, made sure that Sarah was okay before going back to his home.
Detectives are suspicious of Trevor's behaviour. He's told them he had spent all day at work worrying about Joy because he couldn't get hold of her. Now they discover he hadn't gone straight home.
There were a couple of things about what had gone on that weren't or didn't seem quite right. First, he had a concern for Joy, who he's very clear about it was the love of his life, and he didn't go home and see that she was okay. And second, that on his way home, in spite of being worried about Joy and worried that she may have fallen, he did go and check that Sarah was okay in relation to the robbery.
Despite their relationship being over, Trevor maintained a friendship with his former partner.
She used to text before he even left for work. He used to read her messages, then text her back to say that he'd be going round there.
Trevor and Sarah were together for 13 years in what seems to be a tumultuous relationship by all accounts, even from Sarah herself.
She was a jealous woman, and she did go round to Joy's place and said to him, what she got, what I haven't got. And apparently he said, you haven't got a patch on, Joy.
After hearing about Joy's death from Trevor himself, Sarah immediately makes her way to their home.
She'd come to the scene apparently to offer some support to Trevor. Her actions at the scene went beyond what you would expect a normal bystander to do, so she tried to get into the address to see what had happened and had to be stopped by one of our colleagues from the ambulance service stopping her getting in.
Here's his ex-partner. She's just come, give him support, but also something happened to her today that may be related. So that'd be great for DNA.
So I've got a reference number. Yeah, she pulled my hair, and as you can see, I got scratched. And she said, "Yeah, I can use that later." So with this happening, makes me wonder if she wanted DNA, hair, and scratch, and now somebody doesn't like him, obviously.
Yeah. Hi, chap. You okay? Yeah. I'm very sorry. Very sorry. What's happened today?
She started to tell people that she'd been the victim of a robbery, and that it had happened about 200 yards or so away from the address that we were at. And she made the connection that it was likely to be about Trevor, and she used the phrase along the lines of, isn't it strange that Trevor's two ladies have been attacked on the same day?
The potentially linked attacks raise suspicions at the scene, and police make a decision.
Trevor was initially arrested and nominated as a suspect in relation to the murder of Joy.
But that wasn't all.
It started to be suspected that Sarah Mackenzie knew something about what had happened, and a decision was made that she would be arrested for murder.
Detectives in Surrey have two suspects in custody for the murder of 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
We knew that somebody was arrested. First of all, they said a woman. I said straight away, Sarah. And then they said about the man. I said Trevor. I felt really sick.
The hypotheses that I considered in this case were, first, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie. Second, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie, assisted by Trevor Dibnah. Third, that Joy Bolton had been killed by the robber who had attacked Sarah Mackenzie earlier that day.
As you can see, I got scratched, and she said, yeah, I can use that later.
The reason that Sarah was suspected was the result of her, frankly, bizarre behaviour at the scene, as well as a robbery that she'd reported earlier in the day, which put her within the vicinity of the murder at the right time of the murder. Trevor was suspected as Trevor had been to Sarah Mackenzie's address before going back to find Joy, which was thought to be unusual and led to him being suspected of Joy's murder.
With the former couple now in custody, investigators need evidence and turn to the residence of Ash. The smallest observation will be vital in proving their case.
A neighbour of Joy's had seen a figure who he initially described as being male, but later wasn't sure if it was a male or a female, who was dressed in dark clothing with a mask and carrying a white carrier bag, approaching Joy's door and hammering on the door for some time until the door was opened. Another neighbour had heard a disturbance. There was another neighbour upstairs who again saw a figure approaching the door, so there was a lot of consistent evidence.
The neighbours help police establish a timeline around Joy's murder, but the details are sketchy, leaving detectives with a number of possible scenarios to examine.
I think it's difficult when you're in that situation. Living in such a quiet village, also, there's the element of not wanting to cause a fuss. Seeing someone walking in dark clothing in the street and being at the door. As much as an argument did happen and neighbours heard what was going on, you don't expect murder.
While officers on the ground try to piece together events leading up to the murder, detectives are interviewing 64-year-old Trevor Dibnah and 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie.
After Trevor had been arrested, he was interviewed and gave a full account of what had happened. He said that on the day this happened, they'd followed their normal routine, that he'd got out of bed and Joy had made his sandwiches, kissed him goodbye, and he'd gone off to work where he was doing MOT tests. He said during the course of the day he would normally phone Joy. He did so but was unable to get hold of her, and he became quite worried that something may have happened to her, perhaps she'd fallen or that there was some problem at home. He decided, because he didn't know that he couldn't leave work and that he would effectively deal with it later.
Why did Trevor go to Sarah's before going back to check his beloved, who he wanted to marry? Why did he go there first and not to Auntie Joy's? Why?
Sarah Mackenzie was arrested. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, as though she didn't understand why this had happened to her. And she maintained that initially. Her initial response to the questions asked by my colleagues who interviewed her was no comment, but in a way that she didn't know what this was about and had no understanding of it. She did become unwell while she was in custody and was taken to hospital.
Meanwhile, Joy's fiancé, Trevor, has been held under suspicion of murder for 36 hours. Detectives are running out of time to charge him.
My name's Trevor and I was Joy's fiancé. Trying to prove your innocence is very hard. Very hard. But yeah, she was just so nice, so genuine. Yeah, she's Joy by name and Joy by nature. The 7 months that Joy and I had together was just out of this world. Out of this world.
The day of his fiancée's death is etched in Trevor's memory.
I left her in the morning and she was fine, and I came home to find her in the evening. You know, it was just gut-wrenching, really. I just knew straight away looking at her, I knew she was dead. I touched her, she was freezing cold, but I don't want to tell you what else I saw because it was gory, you know, and that wasn't by just falling over. But I had to hold it together because I obviously getting arrested, etc. But that was another daunting thing for me. I'd been, you know, all of a sudden they've stood there and said, Trevor, we're going to arrest you on suspicion of murder. And I'm thinking, but I haven't done anything.
Police release Trevor after questioning, but he still has to be ruled out of any involvement.
Blood staining was found on his clothing. It was all looked at in terms of blood pattern analysis and compared to the account that he'd given, that he'd entered the address, found Joy and knelt down next to her, and it was all consistent with his account. There was nothing on his clothing that would have been consistent with him having been present at the time of the offence.
We were able to take Trevor's account, and there were a number of things that he told us that we were able to check. The movements of his car on ANPR were consistent with his account. His workplace confirmed that he'd spent the day at work to the extent that there was CCTV there which showed he was at work all day. It was very clear that Trevor Dibnah was not responsible.
Investigators turned their full attention on 61-year-old grandmother, Sarah Mackenzie. Few people know her better than Trevor.
Sarah's, she's stubborn, and also Sarah's got a, let's say, a controlling streak in her. She likes to be in charge, you know, but that's what she is. That's what she is.
Despite the couple separating, Trevor and Sarah would regularly keep in touch. When she texts to tell him she's been robbed, he's concerned.
Sarah's shown me where she'd had her hair pulled because she's got short hair anyway, and she spoke about it again, and I said, well, okay, but look, I've got to go. Maybe, yeah, perhaps I should have come home earlier in the day, but I don't. What do I say? What do I say to somebody about I need to go home and find, you know, because I can't get hold of somebody? The way I see it, I just had to wait till I got home from work. While I was on my way home, she was texting me to see if was everything okay, is there something wrong? But I didn't answer her back because obviously I had to deal with calling the ambulance and the police because I'd found Joy on the floor. And I quite obviously knew she was dead. Then I texted her back and said, no, it's not. No, it's not okay. And as I say, when the ambulance turned up, she turned up in her car behind it and come over and stood there and held my arm as if she was coming to comfort me.
On body cam footage, police body cam, him and Sarah holding arms, linked arms, stood near a lamppost outside my Auntie Joy's property.
As Trevor tries to come to terms with Joy's murder and being a suspect, Sarah Mackenzie is released from hospital and taken back to the police station for further questioning. She claims she has no recollection of the day of Joy's murder, but evidence from the local neighbourhood puts her clearly in the frame.
We conducted a number of CCTV inquiries and found a camera on Churchview Road. This captured an image of somebody walking down Churchview Road wearing black clothing. The officer who viewed the CCTV recognised that figure as being Sarah Mackenzie.
And what happened was that in the morning of the day, Sarah Mackenzie went to work as usual, was dropped off at 9:30 in the morning by her work colleague, and proceeded very quickly to change into a full disguise, black clothing, mask, gloves, etc., arm herself with a heavy implement, and walk to Joy Bolton's address.
Along this stretch of pavement, Sarah was walking along towards Joy's house before the murder was committed, dressed in all black, very eerie costume, walking with a lot of purpose towards Joy's house. Almost 15 minutes later, she heads back the same direction, same pavement, same path, after committing the murder, dressed in the same outfit, all black, head to toe, again with purpose as she walked away from the scene of the crime. She was caught on the CCTV around here.
Evidence from the forensic team at the flat helps piece together what happened inside.
The property Churchview Ash was a ground floor maisonette. Front door opened into a small hallway with a bathroom in front of you. The female was found lay face down with her feet in the threshold of the hallway to the living room and her head pointing into the living room. The head injuries were horrific. The victim had an injury to her forehead, which potentially was the first injury to bleed, and that may have caused the blood within the hallway. The majority of her injury was to the back of her head, and that was likely to have been caused when she was face down in the living room. The post-mortem concluded that the victim would have been rapidly incapacitated, so it's likely that she would have been on the floor when the majority of the blows were inflicted.
Detectives are left in little doubt that Sarah was responsible for the attack on Joy Bolton, and her house is searched.
Given that during her account of the robbery, she stated that she'd returned home and taken a bath, I asked that a scientist attend that address with a CSI to conduct a luminol search. Luminol can detect blood that has been diluted up to 10,000 times. It's an incredible search tool for us where offenders have tried to clean up after they've committed an offence. These images are taken within the bathroom at Sarah Mackenzie's address. This picture shows what can be seen with the naked eye. As you can see, there is no visible blood staining at all. And this image shows those areas with the luminol visible. So that is what a reaction, a positive reaction with luminol looks like. The areas that are marked here are the areas that were swabbed and showed that Joy Bolton's DNA was represented within them. That evidence for us was key. Within that blood, which was swabbed by a CSI, was Sarah Mackenzie's DNA, as you would expect, as it's her bathroom. But also, there were very small amounts of Joy Bolton's DNA as well. And although we couldn't categorically say that it was blood, luminol would indicate that it was.
I was confident that we had a good and strong circumstantial case with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie, but we were missing something.
Fingernail swabs and cuttings were taken from Joy, and while Sarah was still in custody, I made a fast-track submission of those swabs and cuttings to the lab. Very quickly, that came back with Sarah's DNA under Joy's fingernails on her right hand, which corresponded to the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
In Surrey, analysis of DNA found under murder victim Joy Bolton's fingernails has come back as Sarah Mackenzie's.
Whilst Joy was vulnerable, she did put up a fight, and one of her last actions was to prove crucial in proving this case.
The DNA analysis reveals the sample to be a 1 in a billion match, proving that Mackenzie was at the scene when Joy died.
If, you know, Joy had to stand up to anybody, she would. She did give her last fought, you know. She was very weak, could barely stand up unaided, as I say, but she fought back and slapped, scratched, whatever she did to Sarah's head, and thank goodness she did.
But Sarah says she can explain her DNA being on Joy. She reminds investigators that she too is the victim of an assault.
Sarah implied that the offender had stolen her DNA and planted it under Joy's fingernails after inflicting catastrophic injury. They would have had to have the presence of mind to have thought to have planted the DNA under the fingernail of Joy's right hand, which was in keeping with the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
The robbery is that it was intended to give Sarah Mackenzie a reason to be in the area that the murder had happened in case she'd been picked up on CCTV or seen by somebody, because she knew that Joy had scratched her, she knew that the police had her DNA, and she knew that we would find her through that to account for her DNA being on Joy's fingernails.
But Sarah sticks to her story, insisting that she was robbed on the same morning as Joy was attacked. A public appeal is made for information, but investigators find no evidence of a robbery having occurred.
With all of the circumstantial evidence and now a very good forensic hit, we were satisfied that there was more than enough evidence with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie with Joy's murder.
On the 17th of May 2023, Sarah Mackenzie is formally charged with the murder of Joy Bolton and perverting the course of justice. Police and prosecutors need to prepare for trial and identify a motive. Why would Sarah want Joy dead? A delve into the months leading up to the murder throws up some clues after Trevor left Sarah for Joy.
A fire was reported to the fire service initially of a shed in Sarah Mackenzie's front garden. At the time, it was treated as being of a suspicious origin. It was noted later that most of the property that was destroyed belonged to Trevor. Sarah Mackenzie was likely to have set the fire herself.
To me, it doesn't take much to work out what the problem was, why it happened. It purely happened because I put on Facebook the previous day that we'd got engaged. I mean, it's pretty obvious from that.
The fire was not the only disturbance that Sarah was accused of creating.
When he left her, she had damaged his property, thrown it out of the window, cut up his leather jacket, burnt photographs of his family.
And then a couple of weeks later, she then gets, my auntie gets a message on her phone, a shouting down message, you're this, you're that, you know, really nastily.
People say to me it's jealousy, and I do understand that people do get jealous, but do you still have to go to that length? Is there a necessity to go to that length?
Within 6 months of the brutal murder of Joy Bolton, 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie stands trial. She pleads not guilty.
On Thursday, the 11th of May 2023, between 10 o'clock and 10:20 a.m, Joy Bolton opened her front door to someone. Shortly after opening the door, that person proceeded to bludgeon her to death with a heavy implement. These are the first words that the jury heard about the case that they were about to try. They knew it was a murder. They knew nothing else.
5 weeks it went on for. Long 5 weeks, cold, wet, windy, horrible, reliving every moment.
It was just awful. It was awful every time going into that courtroom to think what you're going to hear next.
Sarah Mackenzie presented herself, as we anticipated she would, as somebody who herself was vulnerable and playing on her age.
I sat where I couldn't see her because I couldn't bear to face her for what she had done to my dear sister Joy.
But I think the worst thing is just knowing that Sarah didn't do it 20 plus times only. She kicked her as well. Like some, I don't know, like a dead thing at the side of the road, maybe. To hear that my auntie's flat was a blood-splattered place. A murder scene.
Sarah Mackenzie instructed her lawyers to go down the route of trying to blame someone, but it was plain from the police evidence, and indeed the evidence we called via the police officers, that there was no foundation to suggest that anybody else was a possible candidate for this crime.
After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
It didn't take the jury long to convict Sarah Mackenzie. That came as no surprise in reality, given the strength of the evidence.
Sarah Mackenzie is found guilty of murder and perverting the course of justice. She's sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years.
She just stood there and grinned. As much to say, oh well.
I'm sorry, at the end of the day, 26 years is still not going to bring Joy back. You know, I know it's supposed to be a life term, and in theory, she'll die in jail. But at the end of the day, that doesn't bring Joy back. She was just the love of my life.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do. Most people resist it. Unfortunately, for Joy Bolton, not Sarah Mackenzie.
In this particular case, which was a brutal, unprovoked and sustained attack on a vulnerable woman who had done nothing more than start a relationship with somebody, I felt enormous pride at the work that with the team that I work with. We were able to bring Sarah Mackenzie to justice, and that she is now in a place that she can cause no more harm to anybody else.
This case was exceptional. It's not often, if ever, that you have grandmothers appearing in a dock murdering their love rival. Someone who was completely normal, who was, as per the jury's verdict, enraged by jealousy and spite. It will remain in our memories for as long as we live, I'm sure.
A year on, and Joy's family are trying to come to terms with life without her.
My favourite memory of Joy is she'd always be there if you wanted somebody to talk to, and vice versa with me. She didn't deserve what she got. Didn't deserve it at all.
I go and see Auntie Joy at the grave, and I take my dog with me, because she loved my dog. And I sit and chat. It's not the same. She don't laugh anymore. I find it hard. I'll be driving through Ash, which isn't very often, because I can't bear it. Not round Auntie Joy's, I don't go around that way. Not ever since. But I look at the shops, see an old lady with a trolley, and I always look back. Is that Auntie Joy? This is not Auntie Joy. So you don't just murder one person. You hurt everybody.
She was a very popular student.
She'd more or less completed that morning her final A-level exam.
She had just vanished.
It was a huge shock for everyone around him.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen.
I remember being woken up by the police helicopters.
The police helicopter picked up the person running away.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
This was every young parent's nightmare. The anguish of where is she, what's happened to her.
Police!
On the outskirts of Wigan lies the quiet and peaceful village of Orrell.
Orrell is a really nice place to live. It's pretty quiet. We've got everything we need on our doorstep.
We have loads of local shops. We have butchers, newsagents, coffee shops, craft shops. So we are very lucky around here. It's a lovely place to live.
I'd say it's one of the more affluent parts of Wigan. There's kind of a lot of wine bars and coffee shops. It's the type of place that's quite a close-knit community. There's a lot of families that have been in Orrell for a long time.
I grew up round here and it's always been, you know what I mean, a quiet place. It's a lot of older people, and you've got the style of people what still, till recently, still tip the cap. You know what I mean? It's like an old-fashioned area. Everybody knows everybody.
Most people have lived here all their lives because really there's no reason to move away.
The parkland on the edge of the village has long been a draw for locals.
Orrell Water Park's a little local recreation spot.
Come on, doggy.
You get a lot of dog walkers coming here. A lot of people come just to kind of stretch the legs, walk the dog and get a little bit of fresh air.
I come here every day. A lot of dog walkers, families, just a nice place to go for a change of scenery.
I mean, I've got 2 young kids. We take the kids around the park. A lot of people go fishing there.
There's always students around here in the lunchtime or the breaks. If the weather's nice, they come and sit on the benches. You follow the path up there. It can take you up to Winstanley College across the fields.
With its outstanding reputation, Winstanley College attracts students from across the northwest.
Winstanley College is one of the top-rated sixth form colleges in the entire country. It draws ambitious, clever young people from across Greater Manchester, also parts of Lancashire and Merseyside.
It's always top standard. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody wanted to get into Winstanley.
It tends to get a lot of the kind of high achievers, and people who do well in the GCSEs will go to Winstanley because they want to get the good grades to go to good universities as well.
And in 2017, 18-year-old Ellen Higginbottom was in her second year at Winstanley College.
Ellen Higginbottom was a very popular student. She came from the edge of Manchester and she was studying for her A-levels. She was an only child to Michael and Kay Higginbottom. She was a talented musician. She enjoyed listening to and performing music, and she also had a notable love of equestrian and horses.
Being a teenager at the start of adulthood, Ellen had a large social network around her.
She had a big group of friends and was extremely popular with everybody at the college. She also had a very devoted boyfriend. They were clearly in a very close relationship.
But life for the young couple was about to change.
It was a very pleasant summer's afternoon. Ellen had more or less completed that morning, I think, her final A-level exam. So you can imagine the sort of mood that she and her friends were in, a celebratory mood.
Ellen had gone into Winstanley College earlier on in the day, and because of Ellen's age, she was clearly independent. So when her particular exam was done, she went out for a walk, which the students often did. She left the college, walked over the field at the back, and entered into Orrell Water Park. It's a pleasant place to go for an afternoon stroll. Perfectly normal thing to do. You know, she just went about her business. Nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Ellen had told her friends she was going for a walk at the water park, then would meet up with them after their exams. But she failed to return to college at the arranged time.
With her friends, she was apparently renowned at getting lost.
She sent a joking Snapchat message to her friends saying that she'd been here about 15, 20 minutes and was already lost.
But as the hours pass and Ellen fails to meet her friends or return home, concern grows.
It was becoming clear in the afternoon. She'd not made contact with any friends or family. She'd never been missing before, so it was unusual.
Had Ellen wanted some time alone? Had she got lost? Or had she met up with someone to celebrate after her exams? With her disappearance so out of character, her boyfriend organises a search for Ellen across the area.
A number of close friends and relatives travelled up to Orrell and actually took to the streets asking people if they had seen her.
Her family conducted their own inquiries and search as you would. They'd be thinking things like, has she fallen and got hurt or something of that nature.
News of Ellen's disappearance quickly spreads amongst the local community.
Word gets around very quickly, and there were scores of messages being posted on social media asking people to look for Ellen.
Facebook and Twitter was going off quite a lot. I mean, I'm only a couple of years older than she would be, so there was a lot of people who I knew that actually didn't kind of know her as well. And I can remember when she was missing, everyone being in fear.
Young people going missing. It's something that does cause a great deal of concern in the communities. It tends to trigger a bigger response because they tend to be more vulnerable.
But as the afternoon turns into evening, there's still no sign of Ellen.
By the evening, Ellen's friends and residents in the Orrell area were extremely concerned. It really struck a chord that a young woman of her age had just vanished.
When it became clear that they couldn't locate her, that's when police were contacted, which was around about 7:20 in the evening.
Her dad rang the police saying that his daughter hadn't come home from college, hadn't come back at the expected time, and it was extremely out of character.
Police take over the search for Ellen, and Detective Superintendent Howard Millington is made the senior investigating officer.
There are set what we call golden hour tasks to do. You know, has the person been injured and taken to hospital, so you check with local hospitals, check with family and friends, that kind of thing.
Ellen's phone is turned off, but police speak with her friends and discover that they all received the same message from her earlier in the day.
What we found, it was a Snapchat-type message sent by Ellen, which geolocated to Orrell Water Park. So we knew at a particular point in the afternoon where she was.
With Ellen last known to be in Orrell Water Park just before 2 p.m, police start an intensive search of the area.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
In the peaceful village of Orrell, concern is rising for the welfare of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom after she seems to have vanished into thin air.
It would appear from messages retrieved from her friends' phones that she'd arranged to meet up with some of her friends in a post-exam, you know, letting hair down type of afternoon.
The college student had gone for a walk after finishing her final exam and was due to meet up with friends to celebrate. But she never turned up, and her phone is switched off. Local reporter Andrew Knoll finds himself at the centre of a developing story.
We do report on missing people fairly regularly. It's something that people are very keen to share and engage with. On the Friday evening, I remember a lot of people messaging on those, expressing concern about what was happening with Ellen, asking me for information, asking me what I'd heard about it, what the police had said about it.
As the night draws in, there is still no sign of Ellen. Her worried family desperately cling on for hope.
This was every young parent's nightmare, the anguish of where is she, what's happened to her. You think that your child has, you know, worked hard, got through the exam period, fully entitled to go off and let their hair down on a summer's afternoon. And, you know, the anxiety of sitting exams that all parents and all students feel is as nothing compared to what poor Ellen's parents will then have gone through.
Ellen had been at Orrell Water Park at 2 p.m. So police focused their attention on the surrounding area. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington oversaw the investigation.
So clearly the inquiries did focus on searching the area around Orrell Water Park. Although you've got to focus on where you think that person may be. It's important as a detective to keep an open mind so we don't get what we call confirmation bias creeping in, and start to focus on the wrong things.
As night falls, police swarm the village and parklands in a desperate attempt to find Ellen.
On that Friday night, a huge operation swung into action to try and find Ellen.
I remember there was quite a police presence in the area.
There was police everywhere. Everyone knew there was something going on, but obviously didn't know exactly what it was.
After midnight, the police are left with no option but to take to the skies to search the surrounding fields and parkland.
I remember when I was being woken up by the police helicopters in the early hours of the morning.
It's got thermal imaging and very high quality resolution cameras to search for people who may be missing and at high risk.
As the helicopter scans the ground below, suddenly something shows up.
The helicopter discovered a heat source. It was in a farmer's field adjacent to Orrell Water Park and some woodland.
The police helicopter, it picked up a heat source of a person that was running away.
Could this be Ellen? Had she become lost or hurt herself? The helicopter crew direct the officers towards the heat source.
The officers came down this path and closed in. At that particular time, there was some kind of standing crop in the field, probably around about 18 inches high.
The search team move into the crop field, and they quickly make a shocking find.
Tragically, the body of Ellen was discovered.
Police seal off the scene, and it's established that the laptop and mobile phone Ellen had with her were missing. Next to her, an abandoned spade is found.
I got the call from the night detective around about 2:45 in the morning. From the way it was described to me, I was immediately concerned that it was a case of homicide.
On the Saturday morning, Greater Manchester Police had launched a murder probe. And the immediate, urgent appeal for information was to be put out there through the press.
Greater Manchester Police are appealing for information after the body of missing student Ellen Higginbottom was found in Orrell Water Park in the early hours of the morning.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here because it's just such a quiet place, you know, and there aren't normally bad people about.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen until you wake up one morning and some poor girl's lost her life.
I mean, I've got kids myself, I've got a little girl myself, and I really was, I mean, all the family was, everybody around here was shocked.
It was very scary, you know, I've got grandchildren, and you think that that young girl, what she went through, you know, what she had to deal with in that situation must have been horrendous.
It's quite scary for everyone. You know, there's a lot of people walking dogs around here and just using Orrell Water Park, so the fact it was done in broad daylight in such a severe manner, I think, was what kind of shocked people a lot.
Since the early hours, Detective Superintendent Howard Millington has been at the scene.
Well, clearly, the main community concern is there a potential for another offence? You know, this is a horrific crime. You know, nobody's been yet arrested. What are the police doing about it? Around about 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd actually deployed to the scene. My priority then was making sure that all the evidence that we could preserve at that time had been, and facilitate detailed searches with a view to apprehending the offender as quickly as possible.
With the crime scene secured and forensics searching for anything that could catch the killer, this popular beauty spot is suddenly put under the microscope.
I came down to Orrell Water Park the morning after Ellen Higginbotham's body had been discovered. It was here the police had a line of tape and an officer was standing there. There was no public access beyond this point. I remember the park actually being fairly quiet for a Saturday morning in the middle of summer. Word had obviously got out.
When I came out with the dog in the morning, I saw the police forensics, all the white gear.
There was a sense of alarm and numbness, I think, in the area.
The murder investigation is ramped up, and police launch an appeal to the public.
There wasn't an immediately obvious suspect, and so my media strategy was tailored around that. It was to include an appeal for information, to try and identify any as yet unknown witnesses or intelligence, to generate those kind of lines of inquiry.
Police need to establish who could have possibly wanted to cause harm to Ellen and why. With her phone and laptop missing, could this have been a robbery gone wrong? Or was it somebody closer to home?
I had several working hypotheses. Is this somebody in dispute with Ellen? You know, who'd she been in contact with? Was there anything we didn't know about Ellen that we needed to know? Anybody in conflict with her? Looking at computers belonging to Ellen, her phone. Were there any communications with people we didn't know about? Well, the reality is, stranger attacks are extremely rare. The sad fact is that most people who are victims of homicide are actually killed by somebody who's known to them.
Suddenly, Ellen's friends and family are put under scrutiny.
The majority of murder victims are known to their killers.
The body of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbotham has been found 10 hours after she went missing in the Lancashire village of Orrell. Greater Manchester Police start to look closely into Ellen's life.
In the wake of her body being found, immediately one of the questions is, did she know her killer? In the vast majority of cases, that is the case.
The questions I would be looking for is there anybody who she's been in dispute with or fallen out with? Now, that can be because they're friends or work colleagues or partners, family, anything of that nature. You know, does she have a partner? It transpired she had a boyfriend who'd assisted with the search.
Could any of these individuals be involved? With a list of people drawn up by police, everyone closely connected to Ellen is intensively questioned.
As a senior investigating officer, you know, keeping an open mind and making sure that every angle is covered is important. So we utilise a strategy called Trace, Investigate and Evaluate, where we look for things like alibis and where people were. And some of these people I was able to rule out as being potentially responsible because their alibi and movements and times showed that they couldn't be involved.
Ellen's family, boyfriend and inner circle are ruled out of the investigation completely, which leaves a terrifying prospect.
The reality was that this was a stranger who'd committed this horrific crime.
With a killer on the loose, the concern in the community grows.
I think people were infuriated that there's someone kind of walking among us in Orrell that could do something like that.
It affected the community pretty badly because there was lots of lone women that used to walk around the park with either the dogs, prams, stuff like that wouldn't go. They wouldn't actually go near the place.
The pressure is mounting on police to find those responsible.
When it became apparent that this was a stranger, in all likelihood, you know, the responsibility on my shoulders as the SIO, it's so intense. You know, I was in the white heat of the investigation. You know, Greater Manchester Police were resourcing and investigating this as thoroughly as possible to apprehend the very, very dangerous offender.
Post-mortem results arrive, which could offer clues to her attacker.
The cause of Ellen's death was two quite dreadful, very deep wounds, in particular to her neck, either one of which would have been sufficient to kill her.
DS Howard Millington said the severity of it and the ordeal that Ellen had gone through was unimaginable. It was a crime of very unusual severity and brutality.
Forensics also arrive from the scene, and the investigation takes an even more sinister turn.
But this was where Ellen was actually found. A little bit further this way, there was a hole in the hedge. And we proved forensically, once the scientists had been down, that's where the attack took place, because of some of the blood samples and other material there. And it was clear she was dragged through into the field after the attack.
Ellen's clothing had been disturbed in a way that was consistent with deliberate interference with her garments.
Also, she had what looked like faint ligature mark around her wrist. And there was a belt, which was around her feet, ankle area, which we confirmed with Ellen's family didn't belong to Ellen. It was clearly a gent's belt.
The discovery leads police to consider a new theory.
So somewhere in this particular area, in these trees, and that's where the attack took place. And my belief was that this was ultimately a sexually motivated crime.
A speck of blood is picked up on the belt found at the scene, and it's sent off for DNA testing. The marks around Ellen's ankles also appear to suggest the belt was used to drag her from the attack site to the field where her body was found.
They were, in my view, looking to dispose of the body. There was a spade found nearby, so I think their intentions was to make sure she was buried and not found.
Confronted with the latest evidence, police appeal to the community for information, giving out details of Ellen's missing items. The plan works, and they are contacted by a concerned local.
A call was received in relation to a man acting strangely in certain circumstances. Ultimately, that led us to a piece of woodland not far away where there was a fire. And within the fire, the officers discovered a laptop that had been burnt. Now, we did know from the liaison with Ellen's family that she had a Lenovo laptop.
When the police went to the embers of the dying fire, they indeed found some of Ellen's possessions, her laptop and her keys, in what police quickly surmised was a not very effective attempt to destroy some evidence and cover traces that they'd been in possession of them.
Following the discovery of Ellen's missing belongings, burnt out in woodland in nearby Billinge, the police make a breakthrough.
An arrest was made. The man was in custody, being questioned on suspicion of murder.
The man in question is a 47-year-old from the Billinge area. Witnesses identified him trying to set fire to items in the woods. Could this be Ellen's killer? He's taken in and questioned by police and makes a startling admission.
When he was spoken to, was identified two other people who were partners and were also involved. And it transpired that these two individuals, along with the male that was arrested near this fire, had taken possession of Ellen's property, disposed of it.
Police, they made 2 further arrests in and around the Orrell area.
The 2 further suspects are arrested and taken into custody. A 30-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman. They are also from the Billinge area. Who are these 3 suspects? And what is their involvement in Ellen's death? As police dig further, they find no forensic evidence linking the trio to the murder scene. But then, police receive DNA results from the belt, which changes the course of the investigation.
a gent's belt that was near Ellen had both Ellen's DNA and also matched that of a man.
It matched a man called Mark Buckley.
Then I made the decision to declare him as a suspect and arrest him on suspicion of murder.
Police! You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something you later align in cause. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Would you like to make any response to that? Anything to say?
Pardon?
Anything to say to that?
Yeah, can you let me?
Yes, have you got keys on you? Or are the
Yeah.
keys?
Yeah.
The keys are there, are they? Right. Okay. Well, we'll secure your property for you. Don't worry about that.
Police now have 4 suspects in custody.
We're going to take you back to Greater Manchester now for questioning.
But what is the connection between Mark Buckley and the trio who were accused of disposing of Ellen's belongings? Could Ellen's murder have been a group attack? Officers delve into Mark Buckley's background.
Mark Buckley was 52 years old. He had been staying with his mother in a nearby address. He did have previous convictions, but nothing that would have particularly flagged up that he was about to go out and commit this kind of offence.
He'd been arrested over an arson incident in which he'd set fire to a neighbour's car. There were a couple of other minor matters on his police record. A fray was one of them, but absolutely nothing on this sort of scale or severity.
Despite the forensic evidence against him, Mark Buckley denies any involvement with Ellen's murder. But police uncover CCTV evidence, which shows Buckley heading towards Orrell Water Park just after 1 p.m.
We managed to track some of his movements, and what that did show, he goes out in the early afternoon, and it was very warm on that day. He was wearing quite a heavy coat, long trousers, and he had like a green shopping carrier bag. And as he's going out, that looks fairly empty. We then see from the same camera Buckley coming back sometime later. When he comes back, this bag is clearly full. He's no longer wearing his coat, he's just wearing a vest, and he's just wearing shorts.
Despite being confronted with video evidence, Buckley continues to deny any involvement in Ellen's murder. But then the other suspects in custody start to speak. Not only do they say they are friends with Buckley, but they describe how they came to have Ellen's possessions.
Transpired that Mark Buckley had been to the 3 offenders. He had passed on a rucksack with items including a laptop and keys that he'd stolen from Ellen. He had also sold on her mobile phone to one of them as well.
With the evidence against Buckley mounting up, he finally cracks.
When he was questioned by detectives, Buckley, in the end, confessed fairly quickly to killing Ellen.
Mark Buckley is charged on suspicion of Ellen Higginbottom's murder, while the other 3 suspects are charged with perverting the course of justice in knowingly disposing of evidence. But what actually happened on that fateful summer night when Ellen was killed? "52-year-old Mark Buckley has been charged with the murder of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom, after he admitted to police that he was the man responsible."
Mark Buckley did admit that he killed her. He said hello and then dragged her off the path. Didn't give any explanation, clearly didn't want to admit any sexual elements.
He was fairly quickly contrite as to the killing itself, but he always maintained that there was no sexual activity or sexual motivation behind his crime.
After Mark Buckley allegedly sold on items stolen from Ellen after the murder took place, attention turns to the other 3 suspects from Billinge. 2 men aged 47 and 30, and a 31-year-old woman.
3 other people were on charges related to assisting the offender or involvement in the crime.
They were charged with perverting the course of justice in that they got rid of evidence and handling a stolen laptop.
3 months after Ellen's murder, Mark Buckley appears at Manchester Crown Court to enter a formal plea. As he arrives in the courtroom, he cuts a subdued figure.
We went to the court, you just see somebody coming up the gantry. Yeah, it looked like he put a lot of weight on. He stared straight at me and my partner, and he walked to the front, and basically we heard what he'd done.
He showed very little reaction to the brief proceedings. He spoke only to confirm his name and address. The defence said that he expressed remorse and regret to his lawyer for what he had done, but could give very little explanation of his actions or motive.
Mark Buckley formally pleads guilty to the murder of Ellen Higginbottom. And when he returns to the court for sentencing, information about his past comes to light.
Mark Buckley grew up round here. Most of our regulars knew him. I knew him personally. He sometimes used to come in the pub.
I have known of him and known where he lived for, like, I'd say, 39 years, since I was about 10, because he used to live with his mum and his grandma next door to my nan.
Mark Buckley was a bit strange, really. He was a bit of a loner. There never seemed to be that much harm in him.
He, in the local area, was basically always a bit of an oddball, a bit of a loner. We'd always get stories about him, always doing something. In the local area, people were wary of him.
Buckley's past criminal convictions are revealed to the courtroom.
I can go back to August 2012. I got married and we was living near where Mark was living, and we come back the next morning to find out that he'd torched his next-door neighbour's car.
I remember walking down that day, and there was a vehicle, I think it was a Land Rover, that had been fired, and it was him who did it.
I'd heard that he'd had an argument with some family, to which he basically blew the car up with petrol, etc., and there was actually a crater in the floor where he'd done it.
In 2012, Buckley was sentenced to 2.5 years for arson and criminal damage. After serving his time, he came back to the village of Orrell.
When he actually came out of prison and he came in this pub, he was making out, when he walked through the door, like as a celebrity's come, he was still bragging about that and what he was going to do to people over that. He was still the same lad, unhinged.
Feeling disturbed by his return, the local community had come together to raise their concerns with the police.
People were basically scared of him coming in the area.
As a result, police relocate Buckley to nearby Preston. But despite this, the court hears how he still found a way of returning to his childhood village of Orrell.
I honestly believe that he was saying he was coming to see his mother, but not making out that he was staying over here. So the Preston flat, what he had, was vacated, and then he was coming here, staying with his mother for 3, 4, 5 days sometimes. A lot of people was anxious and scared about that.
Tragically, the community's fear and suspicions around Buckley come into fruition on the morning of the 16th of June, 2017, when Buckley enters Orrell Water Park at 5:30 a.m.
Buckley had been in the park probably from almost first light that day. Early morning dog walkers recall seeing Buckley.
Mark Buckley, police discovered, had been in the area for quite some time. He had been scoping out the area on the Friday.
Basically, Mark was on the prowl round the water park, and different people had come forward saying an individual was preying on young women.
He approached a number of women who were walking alone and then let them go.
Several hours later, Buckley returns home, but decides to revisit the park again at 1 p.m, perhaps more determined to find a victim. By chance, Ellen Higginbottom has just finished her final exam and enters the park at 2 p.m. She had no idea what would be waiting for her.
On that afternoon, he selected his victim as Ellen Higginbottom when she wandered alone into the water park. She was a very petite girl. She stood 5'4". She was very slightly built. And he was able to overpower her very easily.
After the murder, which we believe took place probably around 2:30 in the afternoon, it would seem that he was still in the vicinity of the park. He tried to get rid of what would have been heavily blood-stained clothing.
The court hears from witnesses who saw Buckley in the park that afternoon with scratches across his body.
Eyewitnesses recall him making some excuse that he was rather hot and bothered because he'd had a bit of an episode with the dog, and some of the scratches, which were probably poor Ellen's defensive actions that had caused those, he blamed on getting tangled up with the bushes in his lead and his dog.
2 hours after Ellen's murder, Buckley finally returns home wearing only shorts and a vest, while carrying a bag believed to contain his blood-stained clothing, as well as Ellen's stolen belongings. Buckley then sells the items to his friends, the trio from Billinge, claiming he found them in the park.
It became clear that these people used drugs. It was a chance to make some money, and ultimately some of the money that they received for items that, you know, they'd taken possession of was spent on drugs, and it was as simple as that, really.
And later that night, as news of Ellen's disappearance was spreading through the village, Buckley returns to the scene of the crime.
It would appear that Buckley decided to go back later to try to hide Ellen's body. He'd gone back with a spade, and the police were still at that stage searching for Ellen. His activities in the park registered on a heat-seeking camera that the police were deploying during their search. He was seen effectively by the police in what we believe was an attempt to make a better job at hiding poor Ellen's body in the undergrowth.
The prosecution puts its theory to the court as to what lay behind Buckley's crime.
When we presented the case at the Crown Court, we maintained that there was a sexual element to the crime. Mark Buckley denied and continued to deny throughout that there was any sexual motivation or activity associated with the killing.
But it's revealed to the courtroom that following searches of Buckley's address, police discovered a bag.
That bag was recovered from inside a bin. It was heavily blood-stained inside. And it also, in the bottom of it, was still what I can only describe as a rape kit.
He was found to be in possession of condoms and lubricants and other unsavoury items in a carrier bag he had with him. So we left the court in no doubt that this was sexually linked, although there was no charge of rape or indecent assault, sexual assault or anything of that nature.
And the court also hears further shocking evidence from that fateful afternoon.
A witness actually came forward to say they heard what sounded like a man and a woman having sex within the trees. And unbeknown to that particular witness, I'm confident that that was Buckley assaulting Ellen. I'm confident about that because of the time and particularly the location. The location was subsequently identified as the attack site.
On the 14th of September 2017, the judge imposes his sentence. and accepts there was a sexual motivation to the murder. Buckley is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 31 years behind bars.
We went to the court. As he was walking down to the thing, you seen him just basically go and puff down. And I honestly don't think he's got any remorse.
I think the sentence Mark got was really a bit of a disgrace. What he did was absolutely disgusting, and he should never be allowed out in the community again.
After pleading guilty to perverting the course of justice, the 47-year-old man from Billinge is given a suspended 2-year sentence and ordered to do unpaid work. The couple, also from Billinge, are sentenced, with the 30-year-old man receiving 20 months behind bars, while the 31-year-old woman is given a 16-month suspended sentence.
He'd lied to the police, he'd helped get rid of property and handling stolen goods. And, you know, to behave like that, knowing full well what Buckley had actually done, and still get engaged in that, in destroying evidence and handling Ellen's belongings, is actually pretty despicable in my book.
With Mark Buckley now behind bars, the community of Orrell tried to come to terms with what happened on their doorstep.
It did change Orrell. It's not just what he's done to the girl. The people going to the college, all her family, all her friends.
God knows what that family must have gone through. Really, you know what I mean? It's not, you have kids and basically the kids bury you. You don't bury your kids, you know what I mean?
I recall Mike and Kay being relieved, I think, not pleased. I think they were satisfied that Ellen's killer had been brought to justice.
And in the centre of Orrell sits a lasting memory to the popular student who once had her whole life ahead of her.
The community after Ellen Higginbottom's death came together and created a garden. It pays tribute to Ellen, her love of nature and animals, and there is a little library contained within it as well, where people can just leave spare books and can take books as well, which I think it was felt would be fitting to someone who loved her studies and would clearly have probably gone on to university and then a professional career of some kind.
I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
Didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world.
Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at the property.
News of a devastating fire in the Cheshire countryside.
Once those fires had died down, there was no sign of her.
Where is the owner, and are they safe? When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, clearly a murder from the off.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that.
Police believe she was murdered and then her home deliberately set alight.
In the middle of the Cheshire countryside lies a quite quaint hamlet. Cranage.
It's quite an affluent area in parts. There's some big houses. There's a lot of farms around there, quite isolated at parts, and dairy farms, chicken farms. As well as being quite small, there's obviously the classic community feel towards it, whereby everybody knows everyone, and that's pretty much central to a place like Cranage.
The area is a really desirable place to live. I mean, a lot of people with a lot of money want to come and share what we've got out here. You know, we've got quite a lot of famous footballers in the area.
It's a lovely area, and it's just a nice area to live.
In the heart of the village sits Parklands Cattery, run by popular local Diana Lee.
Diane was a lovely girl that would always help people out. Very, very conscientious, very bright. You never saw her without a smile on her face. She was always very bubbly and just a lovely person. I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
She was always such a lovely lady, very full of the joys of spring, and didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world. You know, she's that type of really likeable person.
Originally from Tabley, Diana moved to Cranage in 2008 and opened her own cattery business. And it thrived.
Diane opened the business with an ex-partner at the property and had been quite successful in doing so. That partner then left that business and she continued to run the cattery on her own.
But Parklands wasn't just any cattery. It was the creme de la creme of the feline world.
She loved cats, and that's why she created the business that she did do, which was probably a little bit unique to Cheshire and this environment. So, offering TVs and beds, sort of prices at probably slightly higher than maybe other areas of the country. So, yeah, I mean, that showed probably her caring side more than anything else.
I think anybody that wanted to trust anybody with an animal, you'd only have to be in the presence of Diane for a few minutes, and you'd soon be contented the mind that your animal would be in safe hands and well looked after, well cared for, because she's just that caring nature.
Diana lived in a large gated detached property next door to her cattery, but she didn't live alone.
Being a big property at Parklands, Diana had a lodger who lived with her at that time, probably a bit of company and also to help with the income coming in and to upkeep such a large property and the business as well.
On the 8th of August 2012, Diana meets friends for dinner, something which she often does in her spare time.
Diana met up with some friends in Knutsford at the Manzen Chinese restaurant on King Street, where she spent the evening with them.
She got a lot of friends, Diane had, and she'd be out with different groups of friends quite a lot.
But little does Diana know, that evening with friends is to change life forever and leave a lasting scar on the close-knit community.
11 a.m, Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at a property in Cranage.
This scene was discovered through a family relative going to the address. They go to the house, see fire coming from, smoke coming from the house and the garage. A neighbour was alerted who rang the fire brigade.
Emergency services arrive and work tirelessly to put out the fire.
Once those fires had died down and they'd been treated with, they'd realised that Diana's car wasn't at the property and there was no sign of her.
That's the main concern for the police, would be where is the owner and are they safe? The police have got a report of a fire. You've got a relative who's turned up who can't find the owner. Clearly there's a number of seats of fire. Straight away you'd be thinking there's something suspicious regarding this, particularly if you're looking at an affluent property like we've got here.
The fire experts are going to be looking at whether it's a deliberately set fire, whether it appears to be an electrical fire, whether it's potentially a chip pan that's gone over, and as soon as the idea that a fire has been deliberately set, everyone's mind goes into very suspicious.
Fire officers keep searching the property grounds and enter the adjacent garage. And what they find changes the course of the investigation.
They found her body at the property, and at that point, police were called to investigate.
When Diana's body was discovered, the most obvious thing that would be clear to the first attenders is that the body was, certainly on the surface, badly burnt. That raises a whole number of possible scenarios. an accident, misadventure.
Cheshire police immediately arrive at the scene.
In the time I've served in the police as an investigator, I've been involved with many inquiries. The early priorities are the scene, first scene where the victim is.
But it's where Diana's body is that raises suspicion. She is found lying face down on a wheelbarrow. She is naked, covered in shredded paper and bedding. Her body battered with horrific injuries.
When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, is clearly a murder from the off.
Police believe the extent of the injuries are not just caused by the fire, so a murder investigation is launched.
The most important thing is to preserve the scene. The slightest disturbance of a scene, by trampling through it, walking through it innocently, it causes contamination. So it's really, really important to make sure that it's cordoned off.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
News of the shocking crime spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that and do so much harm. It just seems horrendous. I just can't comprehend it.
In the quiet, quaint village of Cranage, the community is shocked at the news of a murder. But the previous evening, August 8th, started off like a normal night out for 54-year-old Diana Lee. At 8 p.m, Diana met up with friends and had dinner in a local Chinese restaurant. According to friends, she said goodbye to them at 10:15 p.m. before driving home. Early the following morning, Diana sent a text to a friend.
Diana's phone records on the morning of her death showed that she'd texted a friend saying she wasn't feeling very well, she's feeling sick, and that she'd like her to collect a cat later in the day.
But just a few hours later, her property was engulfed in flames.
Fire brigade and the police attend, and they find the horrible scene in the garage of the victim.
She was found dead in her home, and police had opened a murder investigation.
News of the horrific attack quickly spreads.
The call came through from a contact who had been driving past the area saying there was lots of activity in Cranage itself, so we decided to come down. When we came down here, there was essentially fire, pumps, as well as emergency services, police and ambulance as well. Whenever you have a scene of maybe 3 or 4 police vehicles and 4 fire engines, you know that something's pretty serious. The tape was quite high up. They'd sort of cordoned off here, and it was difficult to get any closer than this, really. But obviously, there's lots of residents coming down here, trying to find out what had been taking place.
And the quiet village of Cranage is now the centre of an atrocious crime, and fear spreads that there's a killer on the loose.
The feeling in the community was just of absolute shock, a disbelief that, things like murders don't happen around here.
I think from the outset, it was shock more than anything, and for it to happen for these residents on what is their doorstep was probably a big shock to them.
The fears for a community is who would do such an awful crime, and they're still out there. Could they strike again?
There was a real lack of understanding of that somebody could do this.
The question crossing the community's mind Who could have murdered Diana, and why?
Certainly, any murder, there's rumour and speculation about the victim and the motive for a murder or who could have done it.
Some murders are spontaneous, a lot of it is finance. So you'd be looking at straight away what the lady does for a living. Is the money owed? Has it just been a random targeted attack by some local or someone travelling?
Police need to act fast, so they search the house. But they quickly come across a startling piece of evidence.
There was evidence of the victim's clothing in the lodger's bedroom and also a blood-stained knife which belonged to the lodger. So he's got access to the house, he's got access to the garage. He may have been in a relationship with this lady. So you've got to treat that individual as a suspect. You would have to arrest them.
With such obvious evidence potentially linking the lodger to the crime, police need to establish his movements in the hours Diana was last seen alive.
From their point of view, it's a case of trying to find out their background, where they were at the time of the incident, what they'd been up to, trying to find all sorts of reasons why they could have committed a crime such as this one.
The lodger tells detectives that he last saw Diana at 7:30 p.m. in the garden before she left in her car to have dinner with friends in Knutsford. He goes on to say that he left for work at 6 a.m. and remembers seeing Diana's car parked on the driveway. While police unpick the lodger's alibi to see if it stacks up, the team on the ground make a breakthrough discovery.
They found that Diana's car had been abandoned 10 miles away in Mobley. At that point, they'd also had reports from a taxi driver who had seen a man acting suspicious in the area, who'd also tried to torch the vehicle before running off.
A witness came forward, a taxi driver, to say that he'd seen someone trying to set fire to the car. He challenged the driver, and the driver made off on a bike, and then he's made off on field. So again, the push bike would be a scene, and there'd be searches going around that area.
Was this man Diana's lodger? And had he driven Diana's car 10 miles north? But while police gather evidence, another arrest is made.
There was a person who was known to Diana, who'd been an ex-partner, who had been convicted previously of a charge against her. He had convictions against Diana in terms of beating her.
There were two immediate suspects, two men who were in her life. So there was a lodger, and there was some circumstantial evidence that suggested that he was not all he said he was. And then there was a very violent ex who had actually been imprisoned for attacking her. So two quite strong suspects.
But police are soon able to confirm Diana's lodger was at work the entire day from 6 a.m., hours before the fire had started. He is released without charge. And with the items of evidence found in his room, detectives now suspect the lodger was set up for murder. But by who? With Diana's ex still in custody, police take a more in-depth look at him and his whereabouts.
A large proportion of domestic murders is sometimes it's an ex-partner. Clearly the ex-partner was a prime suspect very early on. The motive is he knows the victim, it's previous violent history towards the victim, so straight away you'd be alarm bells going.
We were all pretty convinced who'd actually done this.
The local community recalled Diana had once lived a life in fear from her ex.
Somebody that she'd known was banned from being in the area, and she knew that he'd been at the house. Certain things had moved, and she was petrified. And she gave me a call, and I went down to have a look to see if there was anybody there. I'd never seen anybody so petrified.
And the location of Diana's car further cements police suspicions. It was dumped between her house and that of her ex's.
The investigating officers realised that the car had been found in a location that was en route to the person, so it probably made sense in their minds that, again, he was the person who'd committed this crime.
Questioning of Diana's ex intensifies.
Is he still in contact? Where does he live? What were his movements for the day or the time of the murder, to eliminate them from the inquiry?
So after a couple of days of speaking to the person who they'd arrested, it quickly became apparent that that individual had a solid alibi.
With his whereabouts on the night of Diana's murder confirmed, her ex-partner is released. Having followed strong leads and had 2 potential suspects, detectives are back to square one.
It was a case whereby the police had to reappeal for information. It was a case of them having come across a bit of a dead end and having to start again to see who had committed this crime.
But post-mortem results come in and help police identify the cause of her death. Could this provide further clues to her attacker?
If somebody has died before a fire, then you will sometimes see soot in the mouth, you will sometimes see it as far as the larynx. But to get it down into the lungs, somebody has to be breathing. Answer that vital question: was this person alive when the fire was burning? And you'll be seeing that she hasn't inhaled soot. She hasn't inhaled the products of combustion. All of this is pointing to her being dead and then set alight, rather than either a deliberate act by herself or some sort of strange accident with solvents. She died of head injuries, so there was clear evidence of bleeding in the head resulting from impacts. That is very different to what you see if there's simply damage to the head from it being heated in a fire.
Police now know Diana died before her lifeless body was dumped and the garage set alight, meaning the killer tried to cover his tracks.
DNA will be damaged by the heat that the fire produces, but certainly trace evidence, if one looks hard enough, it can be recovered.
Forensics locate a small amount of unknown DNA on Diana. And there's something else.
There's no self-defense wounds. That information from the pathologist would clearly indicate generally that she knew the person was there with consent in the property, and that they weren't expecting that trauma to be caused to them.
Detectives now believe Diana's killer was known to her, so need to delve into her private life and turn to the community for help.
Community's key to any murder inquiry because they're the eyes and ears, and they probably hold evidence what they don't know at the time.
I get the feeling, as you do in so many of these cases, that Diana was actually quite a vulnerable person. She was living alone. She was probably fairly happy, having come out of an abusive and violent relationship. She was building things up again.
Maybe the situation has arose where she was probably too trusting of somebody.
Friends express their concerns that perhaps all was not as it seemed in Diana's life.
I should imagine she was easily taken advantage of in a financial way because she was quite a wealthy lady. A few times when I saw her passing, she seemed like very troubled, as though she wasn't her usual self, and she was obviously hiding something that she was really concerned about. But she never really told me the full extent of it, and that was a bit of a worry for me. You know, what was going on with her. But I think most people would have realised something was not quite right, but because she was a private person, she didn't really explain to me exactly what was going on. And I just said to her, if you ever have any problems, you must report things if there's something you need to report. But she wouldn't tell me anything in detail or anything.
With those close to Diana unable to shed light on her private life, the investigation intensifies, and police expand their search, trawling through local businesses and residential CCTV on the night Diana was last seen alive.
CCTV is huge on any major incident and murder inquiry. whether it's from the local council's CCTV, the police ANPR cameras, and then people's own CCTV from shops, businesses and private CCTV. A lot of the houses in this area will have their own CCTV. And if you get a fleeting glance of a vehicle or a person, that is key to an inquiry to identify people who have been at the scene.
So for the police officers investigating this case, they had a bit of a break when they found the CCTV footage on King Street of Diana leaving the restaurant, but at the same time they were left slightly puzzled by her movements, which were caught on an ANPR camera, which saw her headed away from her home address in Cranage and towards the Altrincham area of Greater Manchester.
What the police couldn't account for is about 45 minutes in between her leaving her friends and arriving home. So that gap in time was something that the police really needed to find out. Where was she going? Who was she seeing? Who was she meeting? That 45 minutes for the police would have been absolutely crucial because nobody could explain where she'd gone. So there was something in Diana's life that the police didn't know about.
With this latest piece of information, police looked closely at Diana's phone records and noticed something suspicious.
So as the officers trawled through Diana's phone records, they found a number that she'd been communicating with on a regular occurrence, but had stopped doing so in January of that year.
Is another suspect in their sights?
That number belonged to a David Ryan, who lived in Hale in Greater Manchester.
It's been several weeks since local Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. Police have questioned and released 2 men known to Diana, and 13 days after her body was discovered, police released an e-fit.
The police issued an e-fit of someone who they wanted to speak to. That individual was a person who was with the Corsa, which was seen trying to set fire to it and then made off on a push bike. It's really important that people try and recall what they were doing that day at that time, because they may have seen that offender leaving the scene.
With officers waiting for tip-offs from members of the public following the release of the e-fit, and having eliminated 2 suspects that are known to Diana, detectives have also been trawling through Diana's phone and have traced a mysterious phone number. Could this be a 3rd suspect? And who is this David Ryan? And how is he connected to Diana?
So as part of the police investigation, the officers went to David Ryan's house in Hale in Greater Manchester. They asked him how he knew Diana. He said in 2010 he had met her at a dancing club in nearby Bowden. He said that he had not met her since, and that was the only occasion when he had seen her.
He gives an account that he knew the lady, not well, but he knew her. He met her about 2 years ago at a local dance club, and that was it really, nothing intimate, that he just knew her as a fleeting acquaintance, and that's all he gave to the police.
At this point, officers took a DNA swab of his mouth just to eliminate him from their inquiries.
Despite this latest lead, police still have no suspect. So detectives start looking deeper into Diana's digital footprint.
One of the things they looked at was her financial transactions, and it was noted that were large sums of money missing or that couldn't be traced.
And officers at Cheshire Police found a substantial amount of money that had been withdrawn by Diana, I think circa £60,000, whereby they had no idea where that money had gone. Straight away, that gave them the lead in terms of trying to find out who that money had gone to.
The large withdrawals ring alarm bells for detectives, and there is no sign of where or who the money was transferred to. But with the investigation intensifying, suddenly police make an announcement.
A 47-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the murder of a Cranage businesswoman.
As the inquiry progressed on the 2nd of September, The police announced to the media that they've arrested a suspect for the murder of Diana Lee.
The man who's arrested is David Ryan, the man who Diana met at the dancing club in Bowden first in 2010.
It was a bit of a shock to us all, really.
It had only been 24 hours since David told detectives he had met Diana once. So how had he ended up in police custody?
The day after Mr. Ryan had been spoken to by the police and given his DNA sample, he called the police and said that he had further information, that he did know the victim, that he'd met the victim the night before the murder, and he'd had consensual sex in her car with him. So Mr. Ryan said that he was in a relationship with this lady. He'd been for some time. He'd done work at the house. He had a conservatory window glazing company that he'd done a lot of work at the house.
But why would David change his alibi?
There are lots of reasons why somebody would keep a relationship secret. Now, one of the reasons is that that person is in a marriage. No, things need to be kept quiet.
Clearly, his mind had been worrying about the DNA, that they'd taken the DNA sample, and that he would be linked to the victims. So what he's done is he's tried to say that we would find his DNA once it had been examined, that he'd had sex with the day before, that he knew her and he had sex with her in the car. But it doesn't automatically say that he's murdered her, but his DNA would be found on her.
Detectives acknowledged David's concern that his DNA would most likely be picked up on Diana from the night before. But they still need to rule him out as a suspect.
So the police will be doing a lot of work around this new suspect whilst he's in custody, of his background. The background showed that he was a failed businessman. He spent lots of money. He liked spending money. He was buying stuff, exotic items for himself, for his family. And that shows the sort of mentality of the individual. And then that clearly links to the problems financially. He was bankrupt, business-wise.
They found he was in a huge amount of debt. His business, which was a window and door conservatory business, had collapsed in June 2012. It was quite clear that he was struggling for money.
David's money issues raised suspicion. On one hand, he was bankrupt. On the other, he was spending large amounts. And he'd been in a secret relationship with Diana, whose own bank accounts recently showed large amounts of money vanishing.
Throughout that, there was instances of spending which didn't tally with what he had.
So you're building a picture of someone who's will probably go to any means to try and support himself financially, not do the basics in life of working hard and getting money, but to get it quickly.
Intense investigations into both Diana and David's financial transactions ensue, and it isn't long before a link is made.
The next stage was finding out that David Ryan had basically tricked Diana into investing tens of thousands of pounds of her own money into companies that just didn't exist. This has gone on for a period of time, and Diana had committed a large amount of money into these fake schemes.
Clearly, the victim was vulnerable in some respects, struck up a relationship with the offender. He would have thought probably she was a wealthy lady, she had money, he was in financial troubles, his business was going downhill, he owed money out, and she was probably a target for Mr. Ryan to take advantage of financially.
Forensic evidence is then uncovered, which appears to place David at the scene of the crime.
There was a footprint found at the scene of the murder in the victim's blood, so that would suggest and confirm that whoever was wearing that footwear was at the scene after the victim had been killed. And that footwear was the offender's footwear, Mr. Ryan, and the forensic evidence supported the fact that it was his footwear and couldn't have been no one else's.
And it appears David Ryan has been following the case closely.
Computer analysis of his computers at his house and his phone, and it was quite compelling evidence circumstantially that he'd been searching on Cheshire Police website about the murder, where the inquiry was up to.
Perhaps even aware time was running out.
Background checks by officers into Ryan's computer's history found that he'd searched for countries that had no extradition treaties with the UK.
Somalia was named, and a number of others. So clearly this is a man who wants to, or is thinking about leaving the country because he's done something wrong. This man is now trying a way out to disappear from the country, to get away from being arrested for this awful murder.
Police appear to have finally found their man. And by collating all their information on David, they piece together a timeline of a murder.
Diana had obviously left the Man's End restaurant in King Street in Knutsford.
And they know that her car was caught by the ANPR cameras driving away from her home.
From there, she'd gone to Hale in Manchester to see David Ryan in her car. She picked him up. They travelled back down to Cranage, whereby they spent the night. And then, obviously, in the early hours of the morning, for whatever happened and whatever reasons, Diana was murdered.
Having killed the person he's been having an affair with for almost 2 years, David then sets a scene.
So following the murder, Mr. Ryan decided to cover his tracks, planting evidence in the lodger's room, using a dagger, leaving it there that he'd used to commit the crime. He'd also then started to plant various fires around the house.
He tried to burn the body to try and get rid of forensic evidence.
The problem being that he found that where he'd started those fires, there wasn't enough oxygen for the fires to let hold. The fires just burnt themselves out, so they didn't have the effect that he wanted to. His plan, quite clearly, was to destroy the whole property, to make sure nothing was left, to make sure no evidence was left behind, so nothing could be traced back to him.
This was all about him getting away with it. This is about him walking away and leaving whatever behind him. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about passion. This was, how do I get out of this? And can you imagine using that amount of violence just to get out of something?
The police had sufficient evidence to go to the CPS to charge Mr. Ryan with murder.
But what really went on that fateful morning? And what may have driven David to murder Diana?
The trial of a man from the Altrincham area accused of killing a Cranage businesswoman has begun. Diana Lee, who was 54, was found dead after a fire at her home last August.
It's been 10 months since Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. And 48-year-old David Ryan faces trial for her murder at Chester Crown Court.
Heading into the trial for this crime, I would clearly be concerned of all the evidence we've got. Have we got sufficient evidence to convict him beyond all reasonable doubt for a jury to believe the prosecution case and it's watertight? The last thing you want to do is go to a trial and there be some error or some process we haven't done. The continuity evidence has been missed somewhere and it be brought up at a Crown Court trial.
Local reporter James Wilson recalls seeing Diana's killer in the flesh.
On the first day of the trial, it was a bit of a surprise to myself to see Mr. Ryan stood there. He probably wasn't what you would describe as a person who probably capable of committing this crime, essentially. He wasn't very big, looked quite meek, and he was obviously incredibly nervous as the proceedings were about to begin.
The prosecution begins by setting out its case to the jury.
The prosecution outlined a really strong case in their opening statement. They detailed where the DNA had been found in the property, including the bedroom and other parts of the house. Quite a lot was backed up by phone records and evidence of the ANPR cameras around the area. It was an incredibly strong case and probably quite surprising that Mr. Ryan at this point was still pleading not guilty.
The prosecution reveals to the court how David first responded to police.
I think police officers were quite taken aback by Ryan's reaction to the request for a DNA swab. He wasn't happy, he became quite agitated, and he suggested he didn't want to do it. It was only after persuasion by the officers involved that mouth swab was completed.
The prosecution reveals further evidence in relation to a text Diana sent.
The police searched the details on her mobile phone records. They found out that text messages had been sent in the morning to her close friends saying she'd been unwell.
A simple text message, but one which immediately flags suspicion among investigators. The text was sent early on the morning of 9th of August, when Diana was already dead.
An expert gave evidence at the trial to say that was unlikely to be the victim's text message by the language used in the text message. So sometimes we will use different experts in certain fields, and this expert would say that it wasn't the normal language used by the victim, but more likely to be used by the offender.
A linguistics expert tells the court that the style of the text message did not match Diana's typical style, but it did match David Ryan's. Despite hearing evidence linking David Ryan to the murder, the court hears he has no previous convictions. So what would lead him to commit such an atrocious crime? But as the trial unfolds, more information comes to light, hinting at a potential motive.
Obviously living in Hale, it's a very affluent suburb of Greater Manchester. Maybe from his point of view there was a pressure to keep that up. Maybe there was a pressure to keep up that pretense that he just couldn't do anymore.
This man was in financial dire straits. Now, that is one of the triggers that can cause big, big problems in a relationship. He may have feared that his wife was going to leave him because of these enormous debts. He may have gone out and looked for someone like Diana to be able to get some money to fix the other situation. I think he targeted Diana for money, and the reason I think that is because he spent all the money on his wife. He spent all the money on IVF treatments, on holidays, on things for his other family. He did not get invested in his relationship with Diana. So, no, I don't think he was in love with her.
He'd already taken a substantial amount of money from Diana on the premise of investing in things that just didn't exist.
But as it transpired, the deeper he got in, that was actually becoming a bigger threat to the other situation than perhaps even the finances were in the beginning.
Somewhere along the line, this man is living a lie. He's married, he's got a child, he's been in another relationship with someone secretly, and unfortunately, all these things come to an end somewhere along the line. And in these circumstances, I would have thought in relation to the victim, she's gone to his house the night before the murder. She's collected him in her car, brought him back to her house.
Diana started asking questions about the investment. You know, the money that she'd given him, where was it? How was it doing? Was she going to get any back? She wasn't a rich woman. She couldn't just chuck this money away and think, oh, well, you win some, you lose some. And I think that he was under increasing pressure from her.
She was going to possibly tell someone, tell their wife, or go to the police to say, he's targeted me.
So was David trying to protect his wife from finding out about his affair and his conning Diana out of money?
And there's a stage where there's a trigger. He was more worried about his wife finding out and her maybe leaving him. He wants to protect the relationship with his wife, but we can't simplistically say that that is because he's so in love with his wife. It is far more likely that he gets his entire identity from the relationship he has with his wife. And if you took that away from him, you'd be taking everything.
After a grueling 7-week trial at Chester Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. David Ryan is found guilty of Diana Lee's murder.
Conman David Ryan killed his wealthy lover after cheating her out of £60,000. Today, a jury in Chester found him guilty of murder.
He is sentenced to 34 years in prison.
There were shouts from the gallery from people connected to Diana who were obviously incredibly emotional at that time, hearing what they wanted to hear. Mr. Ryan was again pretty much motionless throughout this reading. There was no real reaction from him. I think probably he expected this verdict to come out, and again, he probably wasn't surprised deep down because he knew that he'd done this incredibly bad crime.
I think the most awful thing about this case is how dispensable Diana was to him. We all know she's a really, really lovely person. There's the lodger, who he doesn't know very well, but he's quite happy for both of those people to take the fall to protect his life. He has no empathy with their suffering or what's going to happen to them.
With David now behind bars, the local community look back and think why Diana, a successful and popular business owner, might have let a criminal into her life.
Diana didn't behave strangely when she gave the money to Ryan. She behaved in a way that any of us would have behaved in similar circumstances with the same information. She didn't hand over money to a person who she thought was dodgy or that she didn't like. She was taken in by him. She may have been lonely. She cared about him. She trusted him. We give money to people we trust. She wasn't a stupid woman. In hindsight, or from where we're sitting, we can say, I would never have done that. Well, I guarantee you, if you felt the way that she did, you might well have done.
It's just worrying, really, what can happen to you. And obviously happened to Diana, which is such a shame, because she was such a lovely lady.
Still in everybody's minds, still can't believe what's happened. It's just a tragedy.
For the residents of Cranage, she will never be forgotten.
We're Kent-bound as the experts fight an unseen enemy. Follow the action right from the beginning as new Cobra Cyber War starts. Thursday at 9.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, and neither on Monday.
The only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
When details started to appear of what had actually happened, it causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death.
A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know?
I live every day with the fact that I was friends with a murderer.
At the edge of London lies the village-like suburb of Kew.
Kew is one of the most sought-after areas of London. It's in West London.
Kew is an extremely wealthy area. It's within commuting distance of the City of London, and it's wonderful nature beside the river and the Royal Botanic Gardens.
It's very leafy. It's a very well-to-do kind of area. It's fairly low crime as well. So it's a nice area for people to live in.
There is definitely a villagey feel. We have a very small high street. You will find a lot of independent trades around Kew, which I think that's what people like.
There's a lot of artists and TV celebrities, and of course Sir David Attenborough lives there. It's a world-class site.
Kew was the perfect place for aspiring French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Berteau to set up home in 2009.
Laureline was my best friend, my close friend. She was like a sister to me. We always be united. We always be in touch. We just developed a friendship, more than a friendship. Our children called her Auntie Lolo, and my daughter has her name. She was family.
She was a vivacious, very popular, well-liked young woman who was beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. She was easy to like and was a very caring and considerate kind of person.
The future seemed bright for Laureline, and London was the place to help make her career ambitions come true.
She was born in Aix-en-Provence, but she came to London to pursue her dream of becoming a film producer.
Laureline had a lot of passion, but she developed a real passion for cinema. She was a passionate people. She was a determined people. She was a hard worker. She started her own production company. She got a Grammy as a production assistant on a movie with Dame Joan Collins. For us, it was nice and amazing, but I know for England was a dream, and it was a dream.
Despite a successful career, Laureline was happiest at home with her dogs.
Laureline was a dog lover. She loves animals. She had an Instagram of a video every day with her two dogs, Haley, a husky, and Blake, a Rottweiler. Okay, so nice. They sleep on the bed, and we see that on Instagram every day. It's like they're her children for her.
And on top of her busy life in the UK, Laureline stayed in regular contact with her family in France.
Laureline was very close to her family. Oh yes, she used to call her mom every day and maybe twice a day, on the morning and the evening. So the family for Laureline is everything. Family and friends and pets was everything.
In March 2019, Laureline was due to move out of her flat in Kew into a new place. Something friends and family were eagerly waiting to hear about.
On Sunday, she didn't answer us, neither on Monday, and it was already strange.
Certainly raised alarm bells the fact that Laureline had not spoken to her best friend and her mum and her family, when she would normally speak to her mum every day and speak to her best friend very regularly as well. So the only communication that they had seemingly from her was by text message.
But there was something unusual about Laureline's texts.
Her friends had received some strange text messages from her that didn't really chime with the kind of person that they knew her to be. For example, her best friend said that she thought it was strange that she said that she was going on a shopping spree in Oxford Street because she knew that she usually shopped online and got all her clothes from online retailers. She'd described how she was looking forward to getting a boob job and liposuction. Certainly not the kind of thing that she would have said. So this kind of thing immediately raised alarms, and they were very, very concerned that she just seemed to be communicating by text message, but nobody had seen her.
Confused by Laureline's strange behaviour, her sister-in-law makes her way to the property in Kew.
And when she couldn't find her, she alerted the police.
Laureline was reported missing on the 6th of March 2019, and that means that a police officer would be dispatched to talk to her about her concerns and take a report. The missing persons inquiry started with questions to her sister-in-law, and potentially any friends that could be found to say, have you seen her? Can you tell us when you last saw her? And the concern was raised because her sister-in-law had visited the address and she could hear dogs barking, Laureline's dogs, and no sign of Laureline. Laureline was a lover of dogs, so she would never leave her dogs alone. They were her children, essentially, at the time. And also, because it was now Tuesday, Laureline had failed to turn up for work, so work colleagues were now concerned. So you had a lot of people voicing their concern about where Laureline was, and that made it a concern for the police because this was completely out of character and completely unusual behaviour.
Police begin their inquiries by also visiting Laureline's address.
In a missing persons inquiry, police will attend an address, the place where the person lives, because within that premises you might find something to indicate where they've gone. It might be a ticket, it might be a receipt, it could be anything. And also you want to make sure that they haven't come to harm behind locked doors. So there would be a natural instinct for officers to get into that premises, and quite often that's by breaking in to check on the welfare of somebody, and that's what they did in this case. The officers went in, searched the premises, and she was not anywhere. But what officers could see inside that address was the boxes all still ready to be packed.
It looked as if she was just about to move out. Her belongings were all boxed up, ready as if she was about to move out of the flat straight away. So it looked like the home had been disrupted in some way.
Back at the police station, officers assess the risk of Laureline's disappearance.
A missing person is graded low, medium, or high risk, and different things happen at different levels. In the low risk, you've got people who perhaps there's no particular harm that you can think, they might just have gone away, and the concern is quite a low for them. Medium risk, slightly more work is done around that because people are concerned, but it might be within their character to go away for a weekend or something like that. So it's not necessarily out of character. Whereas you have the high risk category, and that's where Laureline sat, because this was completely out of character.
After reviewing the case as high risk, police returned to Laureline's address for a more detailed search.
They went out into the garden using torches. And in the garden, they had a look around and they could see various items leaning up against a fence, so a spade, shovel, other items that you would use in general gardening, and a bag of compost as well on the right-hand fence. And one of the officers then turned attention to the flower bed on the left-hand side as you walked into the garden and noticed that it was completely brand new in one section. The CID officer moved the soil back closest to them and identified what they thought was the shape of a foot sticking out in essentially a shallow grave. And just a few more scrapes to see what was there made them believe that what they had found was indeed a body.
Police searching for missing French filmmaker Laureline Garcia-Berteau have discovered a body buried in her back garden.
As soon as you find a body in a shallow grave in a premises, it becomes a murder inquiry straight away because that person doesn't put themselves there. And that's when the process of the team start to make their own inquiries, and all the different actions that come out of that initial deployment begin in earnest.
With a murder investigation in progress, police secure the scene.
We had a lot of this area all cordoned off, a lot of crime scene tents here, because as you bring items out of the garden as well, you need to put them somewhere which is forensically sterile. And so we tried to utilise the area out the back of the premises for that reason. So here really behind the house, the alleyway that we used, and trying to set up a forensic retrieval here was quite difficult because the wind was so strong that it was hard. And obviously knowing how detailed you've got to be and how, to avoid any contamination because it is windy and also you're dealing with an outside scene, it's particularly more complex than you would expect an inner scene to be.
Arrive on scene, having been called by the homicide assessment team, usually, and we'll receive a briefing from the local borough police about what the incident involves and why it may be suspicious. Once we've had a briefing, we'll be wearing protective clothing, mask, overshoes, gloves, scene suit, and entering the scene to look for to see what has occurred.
The crime scene manager is in charge of that scene forensically, whether they be physical exhibits that are taken out of a premises or whether they are swabs or fingerprints. They're in charge of running that scene.
The recovery of the body is totally down to the archaeologist, and he'll work in tandem with an anthropologist. Their speciality is bone analysis, who died, how they died and where they died. Working together, they can rapidly maximise the recording, interpretation and recovery of the body.
As the team removes several inches of soil, it becomes clear that the individual is in fact female.
Obviously, your first thought is, well, Laureline Garcia Bartu is missing, and we have a body in the garden, and it's suspicious that she's missing. So, obviously, my thought is straight away, well, this is probably going to be Laureline. But you don't go to a family with probablys. You have to be sure.
As forensic archaeologists continue digging, the level of brutality on the victim becomes clear.
Once the body was removed from the ground, she was lying on her back, naked. She was wrapped in a mattress, and there was silver duct tape around the area of where the knees and the neck were. The mattress was then wrapped in a cord around the middle of it, but around her neck she had an electric wire. She had a head bag on, and her arms were tied behind her back with duct tape. You could surmise that she'd been strangled or that the cord had actually caused her death. You couldn't see the rest of the body to determine what else was there. She may have been stabbed for all we knew, but that wouldn't be able to be looked at until we got to the mortuary.
As the body is taken to the mortuary to establish a cause of death and identify the victim, news of a murder spreads.
For a young woman's body to be dug up in a garden in Kew, it would have been, almost unheard of in a neighbourhood like that. A lot of the neighbours would have been shocked, but also extremely puzzled as to how this could have happened.
I haven't ever heard of a murder in Kew.
It's quite shocking to hear a murder in Kew. It's not normally the norms of anything.
When details started to appear of what had happened, people become very concerned about, something that's happening in your neighbourhood. It causes a lot of concern, a lot of fear as well.
At the mortuary, the post-mortem gets underway.
Once the body arrives for the post-mortem, he would look at both sides of the body for any bruising, any wounds, anything that stands out to him. There was no obvious bruising around the neck, but once you get the body opened up and get under the skin, then the bruising can be seen. Be checking the hyoid bone, the bone under the neck, see if it's fractured, and then it results in the conclusion that death had been compression of the neck, believed via strangulation.
With a cause of death established, it isn't long before the individual is identified. as none other than Laureline Garcia-Berteau.
I was in my car alone, and I just remember that it was Laureline's mother I had on phone. So I just said the word, is it her? Is she dead? And I hung up. I remember I screamed. I never screamed like that. It's taken a part of me. She was like my little sister, you know? It's taken a part of me.
The investigation into Laureline's murder ramps up and initial theories are considered. Could this be a burglary gone wrong?
It's a very attractive area for a burglar because there's a lot of assets there.
So if someone's forced their way into the address and killed somebody, and then that person has disappeared, we need to identify them as soon as we can. So we'll be looking to make a light source examination, any finger marks that are not seen to the naked eye. Fingerprint examination. We'll be looking for any DNA that we can find, possibly cigarette ends. Things have been moved by the suspect. He may have opened drawers, cupboards, so we'll be looking to examine those, DNA. He may have cut himself somewhere, so he may have drops of blood that he's left behind.
But a closer examination begins to cast doubts on a suspected burglary.
If it had been a burglary gone wrong, you wouldn't expect them to hang around and attempt to hide the body in the way that it had been.
Police take into consideration Laureline's plans to move home around the time of her murder.
Could the movers have been involved? Could it have been a handyman that had, come round and helped box up her belongings?
After making their inquiries, police discovered that no removal firm had attended the address. So focus switches to Laureline's personal life.
Certainly from her communication with her friends, it was suggested that when she'd last spoken to her sister-in-law, she was looking forward to going on a date with a vet that she'd met. But it was very unclear whether that date had actually taken place or who he was, even. There was very little information given. Who had she been talking to online, on dating apps? Maybe she met somebody else. That was certainly something that could be unravelled through looking into her mobile phone and computer.
Police decide to try to look into Laureline's last movements to see if they hold any clues.
You look at things like Laureline's finance, so where has she spent money? Which indicates that she might have been to a certain place, like a restaurant, which we found out on Friday the 1st, she'd been to a restaurant, and then that venue itself has CCTV.
The CCTV shows Laureline dining with a man, with the pair holding hands. And inquiries with those closest to Laureline soon identifies him.
Laureline was in a on-off relationship for quite a number of years with a man called Kirill Belarusov. And this relationship had been going on for 8+ years, but had kind of fizzled out a couple of years beforehand, but they still saw each other on and off. And so they were aware that Kirill was in the UK as an Estonian national, in the UK to come and help her move that weekend.
Police continue to scour CCTV around the area. Both are later seen on bus CCTV, heading in the direction towards Laureline's home in Kew. It seems Kirill may have been one of the last people to see Laureline alive. But when police try to locate him, they find they are too late.
They had discovered that Kirill was actually no longer in the UK. He had flown to Tallinn in Estonia.
Belarusov has left the country.
Police police investigating the murder of Laureline Garcia Berteau want to speak to her ex-lover, Kirill Belarusov, as he may have been one of the last people to see her. But police discover that he has left the country.
The CID officers got in contact with Kirill Belarusov via a telephone number they had for him, which was given to them by the family. And they made contact straight away. He behaved like he didn't know what had happened, and the last time he saw her, she was alive.
Kirill tells police he was helping Laureline move on the Saturday, before she left Kew to move to a new address. But when asked further about this last encounter with Laureline, he doesn't give clear answers.
He was being obstructive, in our opinion. He kept avoiding the question. I wanted him back in the country because I wanted to speak to him face to face, but he kept making excuses why he wasn't coming back, or saying, yes, I'm just going to sort it out, and then nothing would happen. He could do everything he could to come back. He was saying he'd be back on one day, that day would go past, we'd ring him and he'd say, I couldn't make it, I'm going to do another day, and this just kept pushing back and pushing back. And you get to a point where you think, well, that's enough. I know he's trying to avoid him coming back.
I think the fact that Belarusov is not keen to help the police in their inquiries, considering that Laureline had been his partner for the best part of 10 years, is extremely suspicious. And the fact that he left the country around the time of her disappearance as well would have raised alarm bells.
Kirill Belarusov soon became the #1 suspect in the inquiry.
But with Kirill refusing to come back, police need to apply for an extradition order.
The police have a fairly complicated process to get someone back from another country. The British police can apply for a European arrest warrant, which is what they did. So they applied to get Belarusov back from Estonia, where he was at the time.
But for the Crown Prosecution Service to agree, the police need to prove they have enough of a case against Kirill.
When you get a European arrest warrant, as this was, when you bring them back into the country, you have no power to interview them. So you have to do everything without asking them a question, which is very, very difficult because you're not giving, firstly, someone the ability to explain, but also you have to reach that threshold of evidence, which means that as soon as they set foot back in this country, you can charge them straight away with the murder.
With police needing to build a firm case against Kirill, they start to dig into his life.
I met Kirill whilst working in a nightclub. It was called Egg, and we started working together, and that's how we met. Kirill was very charming. He was very nice. He was not, arrogant or trying to tell his side of the story. He was always waiting for you to ask a question before bragging or saying anything. Kirill told me about Laureline when we met. He didn't say her name, but he mentioned that he had an ex-girlfriend that he was really in love with, and that they broke up.
But Sabrina recalls how Kirill later spoke in more detail about his and Laureline's relationship and claimed she had cheated on him.
He mentioned that he'd had cancer before and that he couldn't have babies anymore, and that one time his ex fell pregnant and she didn't know that he couldn't have babies, and that's how he found out that she cheated, and that's how the relationship ended. He would always say that it was his fault and that she was very caring and that it was hard on her, the fact that he had cancer. So he wasn't blaming her, but he was saying that's how they ended it.
Sabrina remembers the last time she saw Kirill before he left the UK for his home country of Estonia.
The last time I saw Kirill, he told me before that he was going to die, that his cancer was terminal, and that was the last time I was ever going to see him. He said he sold his house, I'm about to die, let's go dinner. And I went to that restaurant crying. I cried most of the night saying, I'm going to lose my friend.
With police still unable to question Kirill to see if his account of his illness is true, they turn to Laureline's finances to try to establish her whereabouts the weekend of her murder.
Through continued interrogation of finances,
We see that on Saturday, round about 10:15 in the morning, that there are transactions in Pets at Home and Sainsbury's, all local to where Laureline lived. So again, officers are there as quickly as possible to identify CCTV opportunities. And there you see Kirill Belarusov with Laureline again. So now we know he's with her in the morning.
At a glance, all appears to be fine. But when police look at Laureline's finances a day later on the Sunday, there appears to be no sign of any purchases. Instead, they look into Kirill's finances.
So we start to look at transactions that Kirill might have made as well. And what you could see on Sunday the 3rd of March was Kirill had left premises and had gone to a local retail park, similar to where Laureline and he had been the day before. He'd been to Sainsbury's, been to Homebase, and been to convenience stores through that morning, and was purchasing items which were highly suspicious. They were the rubble sacks that matched the rubble sacks that were found on Laureline's body. He had purchased an axe, which we never found, and he had purchased soil, or compost as it was. And you could see the CCTV of him, identifying him clearly as the person purchasing those items. And so you could say straight away then that it's very, very clear what he was up to. That was now that Laureline had been killed, and he was thinking of ways to dispose of her body.
With Kirill's behaviour raising suspicions, police approached the CPS.
We had to go to the Crown Prosecution Service and prove what we had, using all of the information we had: CCTV, finance, witness statements, the crime scene itself, the condition of Laureline's body. And that was something which is very, very difficult, but we were able to prove at that point that we had enough evidence to secure an arrest of Kirill Belarusov. And that gives you the ability to get a European arrest warrant and bring them back. He was brought back on the 20th of March and charged with the murder of Laureline. Kirill Belarusov will go to court the following day, to a magistrate's court, where, because it's murder, they send it to the Crown Court, and then he's due to enter a plea some 8 weeks later. And that plea is not guilty. So we knew at that point we are going to trial with him at some stage in 2019.
And as the case is prepared for trial, potential witnesses are called in by the police and prosecution.
The police called me saying, "We want to talk to you about your friend Kirill," and I thought they were calling me to say that he was dead. They told me he's been arrested, he's killed someone. I was in shock. I was like, "Are you sure that it is the right person?" And they said, "Yes." You don't murder, you don't think that you knew a murderer?
Kirill Belarusov has been charged with the murder of his ex-partner, Laureline Garcia-Berteau. The trial begins at the Old Bailey in London, and the prosecution open their case against Kirill with DNA evidence from the crime scene.
The flex that was used to tie Laureline's hands behind her back, you could see that flex on the floor in the living room where it had been cut. And indeed, the forensic testing showed that Kirill Belarusov's DNA was at the cut part of that flex.
The jury hears of the early relationship between Laureline and Kirill.
At the beginning, she called him my Superman. He's tall, very helpful, especially with women, you know. He came to spend a few days with Laureline at my home. He ate at my parents' table. He was a Superman. A good boy.
And Kirill had even boasted of his career achievements to Laureline.
He had told people he was a stuntman and that he'd worked on films with famous people like Brad Pitt, and that he was training people. We searched in the industries at Hollywood, and we searched in the UK, IMDb, to see where was he in these films, and they're always shown if you work on there. He was nowhere to be found. These were all complete and utter lies that he told everybody.
But the lies did not stop there.
He began to say to lots of people that he was sick and that he had 10 years left to live.
He didn't talk much about his cancer. You would ask him questions and he would say, I'm bleeding from every hole. I've been puking for the last 3 days. I think it's just once where I said, if you don't mind me asking, what is the cancer? Where is it? And he said, oh, it's the pancreas, it's the liver area. And then the time after, he would be like, oh, it's spread everywhere. But he would never give any more details. He'd just say, I'm a guinea pig. They've opened me up and stitched me. They keep on opening me up. But he wasn't very specific.
Loreline's mother, friend, and I found it very strange because he has nothing in front of us. When we saw Kirill, a wedding day or for a holiday, we can't imagine he's sick.
I've never known someone who had cancer. So when I saw him with a shaved head, I didn't question it. I didn't think he still had eyebrows. And I didn't know that you lose your eyebrows when you have chemo.
We were suspicious about the lies. It's big lies, you know? We were suspicious. We tell that to Loreline. We explained to her to open her eyes, but she was in love.
And we were discovering that almost all of his entire life that he told people about was a complete lie. Saying you've got cancer when you don't have, for me, is the lowest of the low.
The prosecution also reveals to the court more about Kirill's double life.
Every time he suggested he was going in for treatment to a hospital in London or just outside of London, what he was actually doing was going to stay with another girlfriend in London. That girlfriend also was told the same lie by him, that he had cancer. So when he was not with her and saying that he was away for a few days, he was going to stay with Loreline.
It's only when I sat down in court that I realized that he was texting the three of us at the same time, his girlfriend, Loreline, and me. So it was really like juggling between the three of us. With me, he was supposed to be in Russia having treatment, and then he was actually in London seeing Loreline, talking to Loreline. I felt like a fool. I felt so stupid. It was so shocking.
The prosecution described that as Loreline's film career began to take off, Kirill may have looked towards her with envy.
He wanted a career in films as well, to a certain extent. He wanted to be a stuntman, but he wasn't, and he couldn't have been because he didn't have the skills to do that. His only skill was lying, whereas she was genuinely talented, and she was very, very hardworking, and she was prepared to earn her place in her chosen career. So I think there probably was an element of jealousy in the relationship.
But it's details of a debt owed to Loreline which could point towards a motive for murder.
She had given him so much money over the course of their relationship, and we knew you were talking plus £17,000 at least at that point. And that was getting to the point where he had to pay that money back. In November 2018, Loreline had sent a message to Kirill, and this was saying, you don't realise how much in debt, how much in trouble I am. I can't pay my rent. You need to pay me the money back. And from friends and family, we would always hear stories where he would promise this money. It's coming, I've got this job, this stuntman job, whatever it might be, which was all lies. So he knew he could never pay that back. That could be one motive. Secondly, she was at that point in her life now where she was ready to move on, away from him. And she was effectively a source of income for him as well. And that was about to dry up.
To the court's surprise, Kirill gives evidence.
I think the most shocking about the trial was himself. He took the stand and spoke, and it was just, I think it lasted 2 days, and it was 2 days of horror. Every word that was coming out of his mouth was horrible. The way he talked about me, the way he talked about Laureline, the way he saw himself, the arrogance in his voice. I remember sitting down terrified because I had been so close to him and just thinking that man is a monster. It was traumatizing.
I always think about the people over the years that have been in front of you in a trial, and he's probably right up there as the most evil-looking eyes I think I've ever seen. And because behind it you can see that he really doesn't care. You know, his image and what he's portrayed himself as is more important than anything else. And he was really, really unpleasant and arrogant beyond belief during the entire 4-week trial at the Old Bailey.
The court hears how in March 2019, Laureline begged Kirill one last time to pay back what was owed to her. But instead, he used this opportunity to kill Laureline.
You have the timeline of them going out on the Friday night, which we can see. We have the timeline of them going shopping on Saturday morning. She had booked a removal company ready for Saturday, but she didn't know where she was moving to because Kirill Belarusov had said he has found somewhere for her to move to. She had no money because he owed her a lot of money. She kept asking him, where am I going? And you could see that through telephone contact. Well, where is this address? I need to tell my removal company where we're going. And so the removal company basically said, well, I can't move you to nowhere. So it was all cancelled. Kirill Belarusov comes up with a new lie. He's organised a removal company for her.
But the removal company never came.
And you get to the point then where Laureline is panicking because she doesn't know where she's going, and she's clearly getting to that point in the evening where on that Saturday she's starting to disbelieve what he's saying. And that's when everything goes quiet.
It's at this point that Kirill strangled Laureline with a cord. And the following morning, he was seen in local shops purchasing suspicious items.
Kirill had been out and bought these items on the Sunday morning, which were used to cover the body of Laureline.
After returning to Laureline's home to bury her body, Kirill used her phone to send fake texts to Laureline's friends and family to buy some time.
He foolishly used Google Translate to try and reply to the family members in French, and obviously it's not going to sound very credible. It's not going to sound like Laureline, not the words that she would use, and the translation was extremely clunky, so it was immediately quite suspicious.
And at the time that those messages were being sent, he was using the Wi-Fi of the address itself. So that puts him inside the address using her phone, sickeningly looking at pornography at the same time he's sending these messages, knowing full well that in that house is Laureline's body. And that really shows you what kind of person he is. It's very difficult to comprehend a person who has that kind of personality, that very strange and almost psychotic personality.
By the time concerned family and friends of Laureline get in touch with Kirill about her disappearance, he's leaving the country for Estonia.
I put my phone with video with him. I saw that he was in the airport. So I asked him, you are in the airport and your lovely Laureline is missing. Why are you leaving? He's no explanation, but he leaves.
After a grueling trial at the Old Bailey, the jury returns its verdict. Kirill Belarusov is found guilty of murder. and is sentenced to 24 years in prison.
About the verdict, we can't say that we are happy because our friend will never come again. But we are grateful for the jury and the judge to having seen him the real way he is and to not allow him to do that again to another woman.
But even with Laureline's killer behind bars, the impact of his crimes are long-lasting.
Today, we are more mistrusting. Today, when my friend meets a man, I want to know everything. I want to know where she is, the address. It changed all of our lives.
This entire story definitely had an effect on me. He destroyed so many lives, not just Laureline's. So many people that have been touched by his lies, so many people that believed he was such a nice person. And I think we were all a bit destroyed because we were all fooled and none of us saw anything. And if just one of us saw something, she could still be alive.
When a routine call to a house fire turns into the biggest murder investigation in Welsh history, you know you're in for a chilling ride. New Murder in the Valleys starts Wednesday at 9.
Friends helped me get over my wife's cheating. It all started with a Christmas party at our work. My wife and I work for the same electronics manufacturing firm, but in very different positions. Jennifer is the Director of Human Resources and a board member. I'm Bill, and work at a lower-level leading line maintenance teams. We met 17 years ago. It was Jennifer who told me about the positions she was working in. We have both been promoted over the years, but Jennifer really excelled. She was bright, worked hard and deserved it, and I couldn't be more proud of her. The firm's Christmas party was held for the first time at a local resort hotel. The board members had access to several suites and a common room at the resort, so Jennifer went at noon to join her senior colleagues. I, along with the rest of the staff, joined the main party at 7 p.m. We all joked that the minions were let in for a few hours, even if we had to dress up in costumes to do so. It was quite a while before I finally spotted Jennifer, and I have to say, biased or not, she looked absolutely stunning. Once again, I marveled at her beauty. She was just turning 38, her long blonde hair curled into ringlets that framed her bright blue eyes and perpetually smiling pretty face. She must have bought a new dress and seemed to shimmer in subtle silver elegance. I also noticed a new necklace that looked expensive. Heck, I needed to reconsider the Christmas present I'd bought that morning. She was chatting with the senior team, and before I could speak to her, we were asked to take our seats at the formal dinner. From a distance, I could see that she was sitting next to the new CEO, Richard Jenkins. The previous owner had recently stepped down from that position to semi-retire as chairman of the board. I had to admit he's a handsome guy, and was a little concerned that Jennifer was smiling and laughing all the time. I settled in for a meal with the other team leaders. They were all good friends of mine that I had worked with for many years. I don't mean to brag, but we knew our stuff and kept our workload high despite the outdated equipment that the company didn't seem to want to replace. Dinner was fine, and the drinks helped everyone have a good time, despite being prohibitively expensive in a swanky establishment. After dinner was over, I tried to meet Jennifer again, but I was unsuccessful. When I finally sought her out, she quickly left, saying she needed to socialize. Later, I saw her dancing with the executive director, and it started to annoy me. By the time she deigned to talk to me, it was 10 p.m. and I was not happy. My mood didn't improve when she announced that the executives were going back to their living room so the employees could have some quiet fun without the managers watching. I could tell she was uncomfortable. Really? I had to watch you hit on another guy all night, and now you're leaving. Who did you buy that dress for, Jennifer? I've never seen this dress before. I must say, it's very sexy. And the necklace is wonderful. It looks so expensive. I didn't buy... She stopped, realizing her mistake. She bit her lip and continued quietly. It was a gift. No need to ask who from. Do you think it's appropriate for your boss to buy you an expensive necklace? He's bought everyone gifts. He's very generous, and he thought it would be perfect for me. So he said he had to buy it. He has good taste. You have to hand it to him. Perhaps I should ask him about choosing gifts for my wife. I could see her panicking a little. You can't. It's a private party and you're drunk. We can't have you causing trouble. I'm not drunk, and we already have problems. How private is this party, Jennifer? Are all the executives there or just you and Jenkins? She blushed and looked embarrassed, but then recovered and went on the attack. How dare you suggest something inappropriate between me and Richard? I noticed that she didn't completely deny it. I tried to calm down and find a softer approach. Look, Jen, why don't we go home together and sort all this out? I can't, Bill. The entire management team is expected in the living room. I think Richard has plans for the team, awards and speeches. I bet he has plans. And when do you get the urge to come back? I don't know. Probably later, or we'll all be using the suites. If the party goes late, I might stay the night. At that moment, I lost control of myself. Oh, you can do it, and we'll be done. She quickly became enraged, yelled something about me not controlling her, and ran off. I watched as she joined a small group of managers and left. Devastated was an understatement. Maybe I was a little hasty, but she was that out of control. I walked back to the party in a daze and plopped into my seat. Before I knew it, I was recounting the story of my grief to my best friend Dan, and soon the others at the table recognized my version of events. They were all very supportive and decided that the obvious answer to my dilemma was to get drunk as hell. A little more time passed, and people from other tables started approaching me offering sympathy. I asked Dan what was going on, and in response, he showed me a social media page on his phone. He posted a picture of us drinking beer with the caption, "Went from Christmas party to sympathy party. You great guy, come cheating wife." Obviously, the post had generated comments, and now, being definitely drunk by now, my stupefied brain thought the post was a bad idea and should be deleted. Just at that moment, a gorgeous lady from the payroll department came up to me, gently touched my arm, and said something about the CEO having a form for that. That didn't improve my mood. My phone buzzed when a photo appeared on the media page showing Jennifer dancing very closely with Jenkins earlier in the party. Attached to the photo were the tags, "Bosses, close call." This sparked an avalanche of other photos. In the first one, they are talking close together, and Jennifer looks up with a slightly fascinated look. In another, she's touching his arm, and in yet another, his hand is resting on her lower, very back. The last picture looked like they were about to kiss. I was shocked. I hadn't noticed this before our conversation. If I had any lingering doubts about her intentions, they had evaporated. The tags adjacent to the images became more and more explicit. Unfaithful, are cheating, are cheaters. Kissing her during work hours. Dump her. I did my best to drown out my feelings with alcohol. At one point, I threw my wedding ring in the urinal and Dan and I peed on it. We laughed, managing to make a short video without showing anything extra. That post got 400 likes, which is pretty good since the firm only has 300 people. I realized we could get in trouble, but I really didn't care. That's when I got the biggest surprise of the night. Jennifer came back into the room. She had been booed by those still left at the party. She was furious and stomped toward me. I remember thinking that her face didn't match her beautiful dress. She screamed at me, asking what I was doing. "Hanging out," was my gleefully enlightened reply. She demanded that I stop posting anything about her. "Okay, well, are you going to tell everyone else to stop too?" Jennifer looked around, shocked that all eyes were on her, but determined to get her way. "Now this will stop. Outside clients can see these posts. And now it's a disciplinary issue." Dan, my trusty assistant, stepped into the conversation. "What are you going to do? Fire the entire production team? We're the only ones doing anything. Anyway, aren't you going to be busy with the chief philanthropist? Where is he, by the way? If it's so important, shouldn't he be here demonstrating his outstanding leadership skills?" I didn't think Jennifer could blush anymore, but it turns out I was wrong. Maybe purple, maybe a shade of burgundy. For once, she seemed at a loss for words, so it was a good time for me to share. "Look, Jennifer, you didn't come and apologize. You didn't say it was all a huge mistake, and you didn't apologize. You just showed up and started threatening my friends. After our last conversation, I saw those pictures. I didn't realize I was married to such a cheap cheater, so why don't you just leave back to your lover? Tell him that if he wants to fire me, I'd be happy to discuss the matter outside." The crowd buzzed approvingly, and I got a round of applause for the first time in my life. It was agonizing for Jennifer. Her professional image meant so much to her. I saw tears come to my eyes, but hats off to her. She stoically pulled through and recovered. "I didn't do anything, and I have nothing to apologize for." She raised her head and walked away. Damned if she still didn't manage to look elegant doing it. I got home at a very late hour, surprised to see Jennifer in our marital bed. I had enough sense to make it to the spare room before I passed out. The hangover the next day was epic. Thankfully, Jennifer was long gone. Tea, pills, and water made me feel only slightly better. Even though it was Saturday, I received a message from the company secretary to report to work at 1 o'clock. I expected Jenkins and possibly Jennifer to be there, waiting to fire me. I decided to go, hoping I could avoid repercussions for my friends. To my surprise, I was greeted by the owner of the company and current chairman of the board of directors, Alan Roberts. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse, but he was a tough, no-nonsense guy. He explained that the CEO and Jennifer had informed him of the situation and that the media page had been removed. He said it was a very serious situation and the firm had gotten a bad reputation. He gave me a hard look. Anyone who posted anything inappropriate would be disciplined. I started to object, but he raised his hand to silence me, explaining, "This will be a verbal warning." I tried to quickly weigh things up, realizing that verbal warnings are nothing. Thanking them, I said that they were just being supportive and were really good friends. I waited with trepidation for him to fire me. "So consider this your verbal warning." "Okay," I replied brilliantly. "Nothing else?" I asked uncertainly. He smiled, and it was unsettling. "There's something else." Damn, I knew it was too good to be true. Before I could guess what that something might be, he continued. The executive director was fired for gross misconduct and damaging the firm's reputation. I was stunned. Wasn't I the reason everyone, including the clients, found out about this? Yes, I did, but I viewed it as a clear provocation. In any case, it won't bother customers. They are driven by price, not by some social media chatter. I'm afraid the misconduct was caused by him and your wife. I have never tolerated such behavior in my company. You should know that it wasn't just about the photos. Other executives were uncomfortable with how close they were getting. Either way, I don't like the guy, and I made a huge mistake hiring him. I mean, the execs get a separate party and rub it in that they're special. What kind of crap is that? And that's before I even found out about his less than impressive business decisions and the fact that he was spending company money on personal gifts. He continued. More importantly, did you talk to her? I shook my head. I did this morning, and I think it's only now dawning on her how wrong her actions were. It's up to you, but perhaps you should talk to her. She's suspended, and there's a chance she'll be fired. I need to do some more digging first. Maybe she'll make a counterclaim and blame it on Jenkins. Jennifer was in the lobby when I left, and I sat down next to her on one of the couches in the reception area. "What now?" I asked, sharp as a rapier. And I heard some sort of response, but couldn't make out what she said. Another muffled sound, and then almost a whisper. "I'm sorry." "For what, Jennifer?" "Sorry for your behavior, sorry for the affair, sorry for what exactly?" She blushed and burst into tears. I didn't sleep with him. There was no affair. It was only when I saw those pictures, when I was sober, that I realized how bad it looked. And when I saw what you did with your wedding ring, I was ashamed. "Let's see. You spent all day with it. He thought he could buy you an expensive necklace. You ignored me, you danced, you touched him, and you left with him. And you planned to spend the night with him, but expect me to believe it was all innocent. You must really think I'm an idiot?" "No, it wasn't." "But you planned it, didn't you?" "No, yeah, I don't know. I guess I thought about it. The after-dinner drinks didn't help. I was drawn to him, but I tried to resist. There's a certain charm about him, and it all seemed natural. It wasn't a conscious decision to do anything. It just happened." "So it was the media reports that stopped you? Did they get you out of his bed?" "What, no. We weren't in bed, we were still in the living room. The others left, but then we got a call from the manager who was monitoring the media to make sure there was nothing outrageous from the party. We saw the messages, but expected it to stop, but it just kept getting worse. We started to panic, and then I saw the video of your ring, and that's when I came back. Hell, saved by Facebook at the very last minute. That's a first. What were you doing alone with him at the time?" "Mostly talking, maybe touching each other a little bit. We kissed, but that's it, I assure you." She said it like it was a victory statement. "If that's what you're admitting, I'm willing to bet there was more than that. And I doubt that night was the first time you two got close. Small comments, flirting, probably dinners over the course of a few weeks." She shrugged in response. "I know it's so silly. I just got caught up in the whole thing." "The thing is, Jennifer, in all your explanations, you never once mentioned me, just you and him. It's like I've been completely forgotten and pushed aside. I think you're trying to change. Maybe you think you're better than me now, that you're the director. If that's the case, then you should have talked to me and we could move on amicably. But I don't want to move on. It's not about me being better, and it's not about you. It's just a stupid mistake." I looked at her and remembered the box in my pocket. I pulled it out, opened it, and held out the necklace to Jennifer. "I was going to give it to you at the party, but I didn't get the chance, and you had already accepted a more expensive and shiny one." She burst into tears, but I continued. "Maybe you're telling the truth. Maybe you're not. Maybe you made love to him for months. I'll never know, and that's because I can't trust you. You can't be in a marriage without trust." "What? It can't be right? I didn't even sleep with him." "Yeah, but not because you didn't try, Jen. Certainly not because you didn't try." "Please, Bill. It's all a terrible mistake. I could lose my job, and I've never felt as awkward as I did at the party." "Yeah, I feel the same way. I've never been so embarrassed of my wife. I thought I might lose my job, and I'm sure you're a terrible mistake." With nothing more to say, I got up and left her crying on the couch. As I left, a sense of dread gripped me. Where will you go now? Christmas music didn't help as I left the building. The season of fucking joy. Just then I got a text from Dan that he had tickets to the New Year's Eve party and I was going... No excuses. I managed a faint smile. I really did have good friends and life went on. I just needed a plan to drink less at the party, but, as they say, no plan survives the first encounter with the enemy. 12 months later. I dreaded this moment. It was a Christmas party and 12 months on from the worst night of my life. At least I felt different. The party was at a local bar, no costumes were required, drinks were free, everyone mingled together, including Alan Roberts, who had never looked happier since returning as chief executive after last year's fiasco. And then I saw her. She looked stunning in a blue satin evening dress and stiletto shoes. I managed to catch her eye and get a radiant smile in return. She moved towards me and we kissed briefly in greeting. We finished the kiss, and the taunts of former co-workers rang in our ears, as always, led by Dan, the protagonist. I laughed, breaking the kiss. "Well, who would have thought accountants could look so good?" She replied, "The same goes for you production people. I'm surprised you washed all the grease and dirt off your hands. I guess you had to do it." The accountant in question was Diane, a pretty red-headed girl in the payroll department whom I had met at the previous Christmas party. We had been dating for 4 months. Funny how life can turn around if you can get through the tough times. I was now the production manager and a board member. This was after we had a tough year dealing with breakdowns and a previous lack of investment in replacement and maintenance. The guys worked really hard and we managed to fulfill orders. Frankly, we were in our element, responding effectively to every crisis. Alan Roberts was also in the thick of things, discussing what we could offer. Alas, I didn't join Jennifer on the board. She suffered the ignominy of being demoted to HR advisor and left the firm a couple of months later. We divorced 6 months ago. At first, she couldn't believe I wouldn't forgive her. But when she realized I wasn't going to change my mind, things went pretty peacefully. It's amazing that you can get divorced online now. Anyway, enough about that. That was the story. It's important to learn from it and move on. So let's get back to making this the best Christmas party ever. The end.